Modern Queen Tales presents A Ghost's Law. The neon owl thrummed with a heavy synthetic bass beat. Neon purple lights slashed across the faces of the weekend crowd, illuminating the damp condensation on hundreds of glass tumblers. The air smelled of spilled gin, expensive cologne, and desperate ambition. I sat in a curved leather booth, nursing a vodka soda. Lana leaned across the sticky mahogany table, pointing a manicured finger toward the dartboard. Look at the trio in the corner. Suits, nice watches, potential. I followed her gaze. The three men laughed too loudly, tossing darts with sloppy aggression. I scanned their hands. Married, I said. All three of them. Aubrey scoffed, adjusting the strap of her silk top. You can't possibly know that from here. I can, I said. The tall one has a pale indentation on his left ring finger. He took his band off in the cab ride over. The guy in the middle keeps checking his phone with his screen angled down, hiding the notifications. The third one has baby spit up on the lapel of his blazer. They are looking for a weekend distraction. Pass. Lana sighed, turning her attention to the bar. Fine. What about those two? The ones with the craft beers. I looked over. Gay. Look at their feet. They are pointing directly at each other, excluding the rest of the room. They are entirely focused on their own conversation. They have zero interest in anyone else. Aubrey slammed her hands on the table. Okay, Sherlock. Find someone. Anyone. I scanned the room again. My eyes landed on a man slipping into a booth near the exit. Cal Russo, I said. Ooh, he's cute, Lana said. Go talk to him. I arrested him 6 months ago for soliciting a prostitute on 4th Avenue, I replied, taking a sip of my drink. He cried in the back of my cruiser. Lana threw her hands up. You are officially a buzzkill, Pam. You cannot turn off the detective brain for one single night. I analyze my environment. It keeps me alive. It keeps you single, Aubrey countered, sliding out of the booth. I'm getting another drink. Try to find a man who isn't a criminal or a cheater before I get back. I watched her walk away, feeling the familiar prickle of annoyance. They wanted a fun, reckless night. I saw the world in threat assessments, behavioral tics, and hidden motives. I let my gaze drift along the polished length of the bar. Then, I saw him. He sat at the far end of the counter, bathed in the dim amber glow of a solitary hanging bulb. He wore a charcoal gray suit, tailored to the exact specifications of his broad shoulders. He held a crystal tumbler filled with a dark liquid and a single square ice cube. He radiated absolute stillness. While the rest of the bar vibrated with chaotic energy, he sat like a statue carved from obsidian. I studied his face, strong jawline, sharp cheekbones, dark hair swept back. I searched for a tell, a nervous twitch, a glance at a watch, a subtle shift in posture. Nothing. He simply observed the mirror behind the bar. I could not read him. He possessed an impenetrable surface. Lana leaned in, following my line of sight. A wicked smile spread across her face. Now that is a man. Look at him. He screams danger. He screams discipline. I corrected. I dare you, Lana whispered. Go over there. Buy him a drink. Use your legendary interrogation skills to get his number. I looked back at him. The challenge ignited a spark in my chest. I thrived on solving puzzles, and the man at the bar presented an intricate, flawless enigma. I stood up, smoothing the front of my black dress. I crossed the crowded floor, my heels clicking softly against the sticky floorboards. I stopped right next to him. I registered the subtle scent of sandalwood and expensive bourbon. You look like a man who appreciates good whiskey, I said, pitching my voice to cut through the bass. Can I buy your next round? He turned his head. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, a piercing, heavy gray. He looked at me. He did not smile. He did not frown. He held my gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Then, he placed a $100 bill on the bar, stood up, and walked toward the exit. He moved with a silent, fluid grace, slipping through the dense crowd without touching a single person. I stood at the bar, the rejection burning hot in my cheeks. He completely dismissed me. I watched the heavy wooden door swing shut behind him. The enigma remained unsolved. The next day, the smell of copper hit me the moment I stepped out of the elevator. The penthouse apartment on the 42nd floor of the Arcadia Tower commanded a spectacular view of the city skyline. Right now, the view competed with a massive pool of blood soaking into a white Persian rug. "Victim is Joel Lancaster," Detective Reynolds said, reading from his notepad as I ducked under the yellow police tape. 68 years old, retired state judge. Found by his housekeeper 20 minutes ago. Throat slashed. I snapped a pair of blue latex gloves onto my hands and approached the body. Lancaster lay on his back. His eyes stared blindly at the vaulted ceiling. The cut was precise, deep, and fatal. A single, clean stroke, from left to right. "Professionally done," I murmured, examining the edges of the wound. No defensive wounds on his hands. He didn't fight back. He didn't even see it coming. "Security downstairs," says Lancaster, "had no scheduled visitors," Reynolds added. "The private elevator requires a key card." The killer bypassed the lobby security, rode the service elevator, picked a biometric lock on the back door, and walked right in. I stood up, scanning the immaculate living room, checked the cameras, the service elevator, the hallway, the loading dock. A ghost didn't do this. Someone walked in, and someone walked out. 10 minutes later, I stood in the building's security hub, staring at a bank of glowing monitors. The building manager, a sweating man with a comb-over, tapped frantically on his keyboard. "Here," the manager squeaked. "Service elevator at 2:15 a.m. I leaned close to the screen. The black and white footage showed the metal doors sliding open. A man stepped inside. He wore a dark raincoat over a tailored suit. He stood perfectly still in the center of the elevator. As the doors closed, he lifted his head and looked directly into the camera lens. My breath caught in my throat. Storm cloud eyes, sharp jaw, absolute stillness. It was the man from the Neon Owl. He looked into the lens with chilling indifference. He offered his face to the digital record. He wanted us to see him. "Freeze that frame," I commanded. "Print it. Get me a high-res digital copy on a flash drive right now." I grabbed the printed image from the machine. I stared at his face. The sting of rejection from the bar morphed into a cold, sharp focus. I had a target. I had a face. I was going to hunt him down. The precinct hummed with the low, steady noise of ringing phones and clacking keyboards. The clock on the wall read 3 a.m. Empty coffee cups lined the edge of my desk like a defensive wall. I stared at the computer monitor until my eyes burned. I fed the high-resolution image of his face into the National Facial Recognition Database. 0 hits. I ran it through Interpol, the DMV, and the local mugshot archives. Nothing. The forensics team pulled a single, perfect thumbprint from the brass handle of Lancaster's back door. I ran the print through the APHIS database. The system returned a blank screen, no matches. I tapped a pencil against my teeth. The situation defied logic. In the modern world, everyone leaves a digital footprint. People have driver's licenses, tax records, credit cards, social media profiles, birth certificates. This man existed as a total void. He breathed oxygen, he drank expensive bourbon, he possessed the physical strength and tactical skill to execute a high-profile homicide in a secure building, but on paper, he did not exist. I pulled up the video file again. I played the 15-second clip of him in the elevator. I watched it 20 times. I looked for a scar, a tattoo, a limp, any identifying physical characteristic. He stood with perfect military posture. He held his hands loosely at his sides. I paused the video at the exact moment he reached up to adjust the collar of his raincoat. I zoomed in on his right hand. A ring caught the harsh light of the elevator bulb. I enhanced the image, sharpening the pixels. It was a heavy, vintage signet ring cast in dark gold. The face of the ring bore a distinct, intricate crest. I leaned so close to the monitor my nose brushed the glass. I saw an eagle with its wings spread, gripping a shattered sword in its talons. I grabbed my mouse and opened a new tab. I bypassed the police databases and accessed the local historical archives. I typed in search parameters for heraldry, crests, and wealthy families from the city's founding era. For 2 hours, I sifted through scanned documents, old newspaper clippings, and aristocratic registries. At 5:15 a.m., I found a match. The crest belonged to the Saint Jude family. I clicked the link, bringing up a digitized article from 30 years ago. The headline blared in thick black font, "Saint Jude Manor destroyed in blaze. Entire family perishes." I read the text. The Saint Jude family held immense wealth, controlling shipping routes and real estate across the eastern seaboard. A massive fire engulfed their estate in the middle of the night. The police ruled it an accident, a faulty gas line. The parents, Elias and Martha, died in their sleep. The article mentioned a single child, a 7-year-old boy named Adam. The authorities never found his remains, but the intense heat of the fire led the coroner to declare him legally dead alongside his parents. I pulled up the legal records following the fire. The massive St. Jude fortune went into probate. The state appointed a judge to oversee the liquidation and distribution of the assets. The judge's name was Joel Lancaster. I sat back in my chair. The pieces snapped together with a violent click. Joel Lancaster ruled over the estate. He carved up the St. Jude empire and distributed the wealth to a network of local businessmen, politicians, and police officials. They stole the fortune. They orchestrated the fire. They murdered the family. But they missed the boy. The boy survived. He spent 30 years in the shadows, stripping away his identity, turning himself into a ghost. Now he was back. He possessed a face, a tailored suit, and a blade. He started his execution list with the man who slammed the gavel. I needed to find the manor. I pulled up the property records for the burned estate. The city never seized the land. The title remained locked in a dormant shell corporation tied to the original family trust. The address sat on the extreme northern edge of the city limits, bordered by dense woods and an abandoned quarry. I grabbed my jacket and checked the magazine in my Glock 19. I slammed it back into the grip, holstering the weapon at my hip. The ghost had a name. I was going to meet Adam Saint Jude. The rain started as I hit the city limits. Heavy, gray sheets of water lashed against my windshield, turning the winding dirt road into a slick ribbon of mud. The dense canopy of ancient oak trees blocked out the morning sun, plunging the woods into a deep, greenish twilight. The road ended at a pair of rusted iron gates. Beyond the gates, the ruins of the St. Jude Manor loomed in the fog. The fire consumed the east wing entirely, leaving a charred, skeletal frame of blackened timber. The west wing remained standing, a decaying structure of cracked stone and ivy-choked windows. I parked my cruiser, killed the engine, and stepped out into the rain. I drew my weapon. I kept my finger resting just outside the trigger guard. I moved with slow, deliberate steps, letting the soft mud muffle my approach. I climbed the stone steps to the massive oak front door. It hung slightly open, the heavy brass hinges groaning in the wind. I pushed it wider with the barrel of my gun. The interior smelled of wet ash, rotting wood, and damp earth. I swept my flashlight across the grand foyer, Faded wallpaper peeled from the walls in long, curling strips. A shattered chandelier lay in a heap of crystal dust on the marble floor. I moved down the main hallway, clearing the empty drawing rooms and the ruined dining hall. I approached a heavy mahogany door at the end of the corridor. A thin sliver of light leaked from beneath the frame. I pressed my back against the wall. I reached out, turned the brass knob, and pushed the door open. I swung into the room, leveling my weapon. "Don't move," I commanded, my voice echoing in the large, book-lined study. He sat in a cracked leather armchair near a large bay window. The gray light illuminated his face. He wore a dark sweater and black tactical pants. He held a crystal tumbler filled with amber liquid. He looked at the barrel of my gun with complete calm. "You have a very particular way of walking, detective," he said. His voice rumbled through the room, a deep, resonant sound, like velvet sliding over gravel. "A slight shift in weight on your left heel. I recognized your gait the moment you walked into the bar." I kept the sights of my Glock centered on his chest. "Put the glass down. Keep your hands where I can see them." He took a slow sip of his bourbon. He set the glass on a small wooden table next to his chair. He rested his hands on his knees. "I left the bar because I saw the badge clipped to your belt under your jacket. I saw the intelligence in your eyes. I didn't want to have to kill a good cop. You killed Joel Lancaster." "Joel Lancaster signed the order that locked me inside my bedroom while my parents burned alive," Adam said. He stated the fact with terrifying neutrality. "He took $20 million in kickbacks for liquidating my family's assets. He earned his death. You don't get to act as judge and executioner, Adam. You're coming with me." He smiled, a cold, sharp expression that transformed his face into a predatory mask. "I wanted you to find me, Pam. I wanted a smart, clean detective to follow the breadcrumbs. I left my face on that camera for you." "Why?" "Because you cannot bring me into your precinct," he said, leaning forward. "Your house is dirty. The people you report to wear the same blood on their hands as Joel Lancaster. My department has nothing to do with a 30-year-old murder." Adam reached into the pocket of his tactical pants. My finger tensed on the trigger. He moved slowly, extracting a small black, leather-bound book. He tossed it across the room. It landed at my feet. "Pick it up," he instructed. "Open to page 42. I kept the gun aimed at him. I crouched, maintaining visual contact, and scooped the book off the floor with my left hand. I flipped the heavy parchment pages with my thumb. I reached page 42. The page contained a handwritten ledger. Columns of dates and massive monetary figures lined the paper. At the bottom of the page, authorizing a transfer of $500,000 from the Lancaster Trust, sat a signature I recognized instantly. "Captain Marcus Pratt, my commanding officer." I stared at the ink. The loop of the M and the sharp angle of the P matched the signature on every single one of my performance reviews. "Your captain ran the operational security for the syndicate that carved up my city," Adam said softly. "He organized the fire. He paid the arsonists. He covered the tracks. He used my family's money to buy his rank." A cold dread pooled in my stomach. The certainty of my world cracked. Before I could speak, a piercing wail shattered the silence of the woods. Sirens, multiple vehicles, screaming up the dirt road toward the manor. "I didn't call for backup," I said, my voice tight. "I know," Adam replied, standing up. "Captain Pratt tracks the GPS in your cruiser. He monitors your database searches. He saw you dig into the Saint Jude file. He knows you found the connection to Lancaster. He sent them to kill me, and he sent them to kill you. You are a loose end." Red and blue lights slashed through the bay window, throwing wild shadows across the study walls. Tires crunched on the gravel outside. I heard the sharp, metallic clack of assault rifles racking rounds into the chamber. They have the front locked down, Adam stated, moving swiftly toward the back of the room. He pushed a heavy bookcase aside, revealing a dark, narrow passage cut into the stone wall. We have exactly 30 seconds before they breach the door and fill this room with lead. I looked at the ledger in my hand. I looked at the man I hunted. I looked at the flashing lights of my own department outside the window. The rules I lived by dissolved in an instant. Justice no longer resided in the badge I carried. Justice stood in the secret passage, waiting for me. I lowered my weapon. I slipped the ledger into my jacket pocket. I sprinted across the room. Adam pulled me into the darkness of the tunnel. He grabbed the edge of the bookcase and shoved it back into place, sealing us inside just as the front door of the manor splintered under the force of a battering ram. We ran through the subterranean darkness. The tunnel smelled of damp earth and old roots. Adam moved with practiced certainty, navigating the lightless corridor without hesitation. I followed the sound of his footsteps, my hand gripping my weapon, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Where does this go?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "An old bootlegger exit," he replied over his shoulder. "It empties into the quarry 3 miles north. They won't find it." We moved in silence for 20 minutes. The air grew colder, carrying the sharp scent of pine and rain. The tunnel ended at a rusted iron grate. Adam shoved it open with a brutal thrust of his shoulder. We scrambled out into the stormy night. The rain soaked through my jacket instantly. We stood on the edge of a deep, flooded limestone quarry. The dark water churned under the heavy downpour. Adam turned to me. Rainwater plastered his dark hair to his forehead. He looked at me with those intense, gray eyes. "You chose the ghost over the badge," he said. "The badge lied to me," I answered, wiping the water from my face. "Pratt murdered your family. He stole your life. He tried to kill me. The badge means nothing right now. I want the syndicate." "The syndicate controls the courts, the docks, and the precinct," Adam stated. "They have money, guns, and absolute authority. Taking them down requires stepping outside the law." "I know." He stepped closer. The proximity sent a sudden jolt of electricity through my nervous system. I felt the heat radiating from his body. I felt the raw, dangerous power coiled within him. "We do this together," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous purr. "I know the targets. You know the police tactics. We dismantle them piece by piece." I looked up at him. The attraction I felt in the bar returned, magnified 100 times by the adrenaline and the shared danger. He was a weapon forged in fire and grief, and he was offering me the handle. "Where do we start?" I asked. For 3 weeks, we lived in the shadows. Adam secured a safe house in the industrial district, a massive, echoing warehouse filled with shipping containers and surveillance equipment. We slept on cots, drank black coffee, and waged a silent war against the people who owned the city. The dynamic between us crackled with unspoken tension. We spent hours hunched over blueprints and tactical maps. Our shoulders brushed, our fingers grazed when passing documents. I caught him watching me when he thought I focused on the monitors. I felt the weight of his stare like a physical touch. We struck with surgical precision. I used my knowledge of police dispatch protocols to create blind spots in the city's patrol grid. I rerouted cruisers, delayed response times, and severed communication lines. Adam executed the physical operations. We hit their money first. Adam infiltrated a secure offshore banking hub in the financial district, siphoning $30 million from the syndicate's accounts and distributing it to hundreds of local charities. I watched the operation through a hacked security camera, marveling at his fluid, ghost-like movements. He slipped past armed guards, bypassed biometric scanners, and vanished before the alarms ever sounded. Next, we hit their supply lines. The syndicate smuggled narcotics through the eastern shipping docks. I mapped the patrol routes of the corrupt Port Authority officers. Adam rigged the main cargo crane with explosives, dropping 4 tons of illegal narcotics into the bottom of the harbor in front of a dozen screaming, helpless guards. Panic spread through the corrupt precinct. Captain Pratt bled authority. His superiors demanded answers. His soldiers demanded protection. We gave them paranoia. I leaked pages of the Saint Jude ledger to a network of independent journalists. The daily papers ran front-page exposes detailing the kickbacks, the bribes, and the cover-ups. Warrants flew. Federal investigators swarmed the precinct. The syndicate fractured under the pressure. The members turned on each other, offering testimonies to save their own skins. The final target remained Captain Pratt. We tracked him to a private airfield on the outskirts of the city. He planned to board a chartered jet and vanish into a non-extradition country. He carried a silver briefcase containing $2 million in untraceable diamonds. Adam and I arrived as the jet's engines spooled up. The tarmac was slick with rain. Pratt walked briskly toward the boarding stairs, flanked by 2 armed mercenaries. "Take the guards," Adam commanded over our comms channel. "Leave Pratt to me." I stepped out from behind a fuel truck. I leveled my Glock. I fired 2 suppressed rounds. The first round shattered the knee of the guard on the left. The second round tore through the shoulder of the guard on the right. They dropped to the tarmac, their weapons clattering across the wet concrete. Pratt froze. He dropped the silver briefcase and reached for his sidearm. Adam materialized from the shadows beneath the wing of the jet. He moved with terrifying speed. He grabbed Pratt's wrist, twisting it sharply. A loud snap echoed over the whine of the engines. Pratt screamed, dropping his gun. Adam kicked the back of Pratt's knees, sending the captain crashing to the asphalt. Adam stood over him. He drew a long, curved hunting knife from a sheath on his thigh. I ran across the tarmac, my gun still raised. I reached them just as Adam pressed the edge of the blade against Pratt's throat. 30 years, Pratt, Adam whispered, his voice cutting through the roar of the jet. 30 years in the dark. Pratt sobbed, his face pale and twisted in terror. "Please, I have money. I can give you everything." Adam pressed the blade harder. A thin line of crimson appeared on Pratt's neck. "Adam," I said. My voice was calm, steady. He looked at me. His eyes raged with a violent, consuming storm. The ghost wanted blood. He wanted the final piece of his vengeance. "You killed Lancaster," I said, stepping closer. "You took the money. You destroyed the syndicate. You won. If you slit his throat now, you give the feds a murder victim. You give them a martyr. Let him rot in a federal maximum security prison for the rest of his miserable life. Let him lose his power, his freedom, and his name." Adam held my gaze. The tension stretched, vibrating like a plucked wire. He looked down at the pathetic, weeping man beneath him. The storm in his eyes slowly settled. The rage gave way to a cold, enduring iron. He pulled the blade away. He sheathed the knife. He stepped back. "He's yours, detective," Adam said. I pulled a pair of steel handcuffs from my belt. I walked over to my former captain. I grabbed his unbroken arm, wrenched it behind his back, and locked the steel cuffs around his wrists. "Captain Pratt," I said, reciting the words with deep, profound satisfaction. "You have the right to remain silent." The city breathed a collective sigh of relief. The federal indictment swept through the precinct like a hurricane. Dozens of corrupt officers faced trial. The syndicate collapsed into ruin. The journalists hailed the anonymous leaks as the greatest act of vigilantism in the city's history. I stood on the wooden planks of the eastern pier. The ocean breeze whipped my hair across my face. The lights of the skyline reflected on the black surface of the water. I heard his footsteps before I saw him. That same, silent, predatory grace. Adam walked to the edge of the pier. He wore a simple black jacket and dark jeans. He looked out at the water, his profile sharp against the city glow. "The feds seized the ledger," I said, stepping up beside him. Pratt is locked in a solitary cell in a supermax facility. The prosecutor says he'll never see the sky again. Good, Adam replied. We stood in silence for a long moment. The air between us crackled with the familiar, heavy electricity. The war ended. The mission finished. The ghost had no reason to stay. I bought a boat, Adam said softly. It sits in a marina down the coast, fully fueled. Untraceable registration. I plan to sail south, Caribbean, maybe further. He looked at me. The invitation hung in the air, thick and undeniable. I unclipped the police badge from my belt. The heavy silver shield felt cold in my hand. I looked at the inscribed numbers. I thought about the corruption I witnessed, the system that failed, and the man who stepped out of the shadows to fix it. I tossed the badge into the dark water. It sank without a sound. I turned to Adam. I closed the distance between us. I looked up into his storm cloud eyes. Adam Saint Jude, I said, my voice steady. You are still under arrest for the murder of Joel Lancaster. He smirked. A slow, dangerous, blindingly attractive smile spread across his face. He leaned in close. I felt his breath warm against my cheek. I inhaled the scent of sandalwood and danger. Then you'd better start the paperwork, detective, he whispered, his lips grazing my jawline. It's going to be a very long interrogation. He didn't run. I didn't reach for my cuffs. Instead, I grabbed the lapels of his jacket and pulled him into a fierce, consuming kiss. He responded with crushing intensity, wrapping his arms around my waist, lifting me against him. The kiss tasted of adrenaline, victory, and the promise of absolute freedom. We broke apart, breathing heavily. He took my hand, intertwining his fingers with mine. We turned away from the water. We walked off the pier, disappearing into the neon glow of the city lights together. The detective and the ghost, ready to rewrite the rules of justice.
Did I hear wrong? Or did that sound like you begging me to come back? Modern Queen Tales presents Tech, Romance, and Payback. How Bug took a whole new meaning. The termination letter sat in the center of my aluminum desk, printed on the university's heavy stock linen paper. Charlie's signature slashed across the bottom in arrogant blue ink. The words dictated the immediate cessation of my funding and the termination of my faculty position. I stared at the document, listening to the rhythmic hum of the climate-controlled terrariums lining the walls of my laboratory. Inside those glass enclosures, thousands of Apis mellifera honeybees and Drosophila melanogaster fruit flies went about their intricate, hardwired routines, entirely oblivious to the bureaucratic execution of my career. The frosted glass door of my lab swung open. Charlie walked in, adjusting the lapels of his custom-tailored charcoal suit. My ex-husband held the position of Dean of Biological Sciences, a title he wielded with the precision of a scalpel. He paused by the central workstation, running a manicured finger over the pristine stainless steel. You received the notice, Monica, Charlie said. He offered a tight, patronizing smile. This is a necessary reallocation of departmental resources. Your mapping of the insect neural pathways is a dead end. The board requires research with immediate pharmaceutical applications. Counting the synapses of a fruit fly offers zero return on investment. I picked up the termination letter and folded it neatly in half. I have mapped the complete connectome of the honeybee mushroom body. I have isolated the exact synaptic pathways that govern spatial memory and swarm logic. The applications for behavioral science are unprecedented. The applications are non-existent, Charlie corrected, his tone flat and final. You are obsessed with bugs. You have always been obsessed with bugs. The university needs forward-thinking innovation. You have until 5 o'clock to clear your personal effects. The raw data and the laboratory equipment remain university property. I looked at the man I had married in my 20s. He possessed the same sharp jawline and the same calculating eyes, But the ambition that had once seemed charming now revealed itself as pure ruthlessness. Our divorce a year ago had been a quiet, sterile affair, much like this firing. He had systematically removed me from his personal life, and now he was excising me from my professional domain. "I will take my personal hard drives," I said, my voice steady. "The terms of my original grant stipulate that the neural mapping data belongs to the primary researcher. I paid for the servers out of my own pocket." Charlie checked his silver wristwatch. "Take your drives. They are useless without the university's processing power to run the simulations. Have a good life, Monica." He turned and walked out, the heavy glass door sealing shut behind him with a soft hiss. I immediately pulled a stack of cardboard boxes from the supply closet. I moved methodically, wrapping my framed diplomas, my specialized entomology tools, and my favorite coffee mug in bubble wrap. I approached the server rack in the corner of the room. The blinking green lights represented 10 years of my life. 10 years of slicing insect brains into microscopic sections, scanning them with electron microscopes, and building three-dimensional digital models of their neural networks. I unlatched the heavy casing and pulled out the primary solid-state drives, sliding them into a padded anti-static briefcase. By 4 o'clock, I stood in the faculty parking lot. The afternoon sun beat down on the asphalt. I loaded the last box into the trunk of my 10-year-old sedan, slammed the lid shut, and sat behind the steering wheel. I placed my hands on the worn leather, the silence of the car pressing in on me. The padded briefcase rested on the passenger seat, holding terabytes of insect neural maps. Charlie believed the data was useless. He believed my obsession with the microscopic logic of insects was a quirky flaw that he had finally managed to eradicate from his pristine department. A memory surfaced, sharp and vibrant, cutting through the sterile reality of the parking lot. 7 years ago, a sticky vinyl booth in a late-night diner near the edge of the campus. I sat across from Joseph Cage. Joseph wore a faded band t-shirt, his messy dark hair falling over his eyes, his fingers constantly moving. He was a mechanical engineering and computer science double major who rarely attended class. He preferred to dismantle the university's mainframes in his dorm room. Joseph held up a single sugar packet, rotating it between his thumb and forefinger. "You're looking at this the wrong way, Buggy," Joseph had said, using the nickname only he could get away with. "You look at an ant, and you see biology. You see cells and chitin. I look at an ant, and I see a perfect, hyper-efficient circuit board." I had laughed, sipping my terrible diner coffee. "An ant has barely 250,000 neurons, Joe. A human has 86 billion. It's a biological machine, sure, but a very primitive one." "That is exactly the point." Joseph had leaned across the table, his dark eyes burning with that familiar, manic energy. He tapped the sugar packet on the Formica surface. Nature spent millions of years optimizing that tiny brain. Those synapses are complex enough to store incredibly sophisticated animal instincts, foraging, building, defending, communicating. But they are simple enough that we could map them. We could replicate them. He tore open the sugar packet and poured a small, neat pile of crystals onto the table. He dragged his finger through the sugar, drawing lines connecting distinct clusters. "Current computer programming relies on brute force," Joseph explained, tracing a complex web. "We build massive, energy-hungry processors to calculate every possible outcome. But an insect has no need to calculate. It reacts. It follows a hardwired path of logic gates. If you map the exact synaptic structure of an insect's instinct, say, a bee's navigational instinct, and translate that biological map into binary code, you create a new kind of software. You create software that doesn't compute. It simply knows." At the time, I had dismissed it as a brilliant, drug-addled late-night theory. Joseph dropped out of college 2 months later to build custom drones in a rented garage, chasing the chaotic pull of entrepreneurship. We had lost touch over the years, the academic track pulling me in one direction, the chaotic startup world pulling him in another. I looked at the padded briefcase on my passenger seat. Inside those drives sat the perfect, complete maps of the exact synapses Joseph had theorized about. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened my contacts. I scrolled past department heads and academic peers until I found the name, Joseph Cage. I tapped the number. It rang 3 times. "Cage," a voice answered. It sounded deeper, a little rougher around the edges, accompanied by the high-pitched whine of a power tool in the background. "Joseph, it's Monica Carpenter. Buggy." The power tool cut off instantly. A heavy silence stretched over the cellular connection. "Buggy," Joseph said, his voice warming instantly. "I was just thinking about the biomechanics of a grasshopper's knee joint. Where are you?" "I have my entire mapped connectome of the Apis mellifera on a solid-state drive sitting in my car," I said, speaking quickly. Every neuron, every synapse, every hardwired instinctual pathway, Charlie just fired me. He called the research a dead end. Joseph let out a low, sharp laugh. "Your ex-husband possesses the visionary capacity of a damp sponge. Bring the drives. I have a warehouse in San Jose. I have the hardware. We are going to build the hive." I put the car in drive and merged onto the highway, heading south towards San Jose. The setting sun cast long, golden shadows across the California landscape. The heavy weight in my chest dissolved, replaced by a sharp, electric anticipation. Joseph's warehouse sat at the end of a dusty industrial cul-de-sac. The corrugated metal exterior bore no signage. I parked my car, grabbed my briefcase, and pushed open the heavy steel door. The interior of the warehouse felt like the inside of a massive, blinking brain. Server towers lined the left wall, their cooling fans generating a constant, rhythmic breeze. Workbenches dominated the center of the concrete floor, buried under tangles of copper wire, soldering irons, microchips, and disassembled drone chassis. Joseph stood beside a massive multi-monitor workstation. He looked up as I walked in. He had grown into his features. The chaotic energy of his college years had sharpened into a focused, intense presence. He wore a fitted black t-shirt and grease-stained denim jeans. His dark hair remained unruly, and a smudge of silver solder paste marked his left cheekbone. He walked toward me, a wide, genuine smile breaking across his face. He wrapped his arms around me, pulling me into a tight hug. The scent of metal, dark roast coffee, and clean sweat surrounded him. "You look exactly the same, Buggy," he said, pulling back to look at me. "Maybe a little more dangerous." "I just got fired, Joe," I said, holding up the briefcase. "I have nothing but these drives and a very strong desire to prove the Dean of Biological Sciences completely wrong." Joseph's eyes locked onto the briefcase. "Put them on the main console. Let's see what 10 years of slicing bug brains looks like." I unlatched the case and handed him the drives. Joseph slotted them into a massive reader on his desk. His fingers flew across his mechanical keyboard, the rhythmic clacking filling the warehouse. A moment later, his 3 massive monitors flared to life. Millions of glowing blue and gold lines appeared on the screens, forming a massive, 3-dimensional web. It was the complete neural architecture of a honeybee, mapped down to the individual dendrite. Joseph leaned closer to the screen, the blue light reflecting in his dark eyes. He reached out, his fingers hovering millimeters from the glass. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "You mapped the instinctual pathways. You isolated the swarm intelligence." "The clusters in gold represent the mushroom bodies," I explained, moving to stand beside him. Our shoulders brushed. "That is the Center for Spatial Memory and Sensory Integration. The blue pathways are the motor control outputs. When a bee identifies a food source, the input travels through these specific golden nodes, instantly triggering a motor response in the blue pathways. There is no processing delay. It is an immediate, hardwired action." Joseph spun his chair to face me. Traditional processors run code linearly. They read a line, calculate, and move to the next. Even multi-core processors just do linear calculations faster, but this, he pointed at the screen, this is spatial logic. If we build a compiler that translates this exact biological map into a digital framework, the software won't need to compute the best route or the best action. The software will simply react, mirroring the biological instinct. "Can you build a compiler that understands biological synapses?" I asked. "With these maps?" Joseph grinned. We are going to create an entirely new computer language. We are going to teach silicon to think like chitin. The next 6 months dissolved into a relentless, intoxicating blur of creation. I moved into the small loft apartment above the warehouse floor. Joseph and I established a rhythm that defied traditional work hours. We functioned in a state of symbiotic obsession. My job involved dissecting my biological maps, breaking down the chemical and electrical transfers of the insect synapses into logical flowcharts. I translated the organic behavior of the honeybee into pure mathematical principles. I mapped the exact sequence a bee uses to calculate the angle of the sun, adjust for wind resistance, and communicate coordinates to the hive. Joseph took my mathematical principles and built the digital architecture. He wrote lines of code that looked nothing like C++ or Python. He created a language based entirely on nodes and pathways. He called the language chitin. The transition from friends to partners happened naturally, a quiet shift in the space between the server racks. We spent our nights eating cold takeout on the concrete floor, arguing over the efficiency of neural routing protocols. I watched him solder microscopic gold threads onto prototype circuit boards, his hands steady and precise. He watched me diagram the neural feedback loops of a predatory wasp on the massive glass whiteboard. One Tuesday at 3 a.m, the heavy rain hammered against the metal roof of the warehouse. I sat on the edge of my desk, rubbing my tired eyes. Joseph stood by the central testing rig, a complex array of custom-built microchips hooked to a diagnostic monitor. I integrated the spatial navigation algorithms from the Apis mellifera map, Joseph said, his voice raspy from lack of sleep. I flashed the chitin code onto the new chip architecture. Run the maze simulation, I said, leaning forward. Joseph pressed the execute button. On the monitor, a digital maze appeared, consisting of thousands of intersecting paths, dead ends, and dynamic obstacles that shifted every 5 seconds. A red dot appeared at the start. In a traditional simulation, an AI would run pathfinding algorithms, calculating distance and probabilities, bumping into walls, and learning the route through trial and error. The red dot on our screen never even bothered with calculating. It shot forward. It moved with fluid, terrifying precision, anticipating the shifting walls, sliding through the changing corridors without a single hesitation. It navigated the hyper-complex maze in less than 3 seconds. "Zero latency," Joseph whispered, staring at the diagnostic readouts. "Energy consumption is practically zero. The chip has no need for thinking, Monica. It's acting on pure, programmed instinct." I stood up and walked over to him. We stared at the screen, the magnitude of what we had just accomplished hanging heavily in the damp air. We had successfully digitized biological instinct. We had created a processor that functioned with the hyper-efficiency of an insect hive. Joseph turned his head. We stood inches apart. The glow of the monitors illuminated the sharp angles of his face. He reached up, his calloused fingers gently brushing a loose strand of hair behind my ear. "You changed the world, Buggy," he murmured. I looked up into his eyes, feeling the sudden, intense acceleration of my pulse. "We changed the world, Joe." He leaned down and kissed me. The kiss mirrored the energy of the warehouse, electric, intense, and perfectly inevitable. I wrapped my arms around his neck, pulling him closer, anchoring myself to the man who had seen the absolute brilliance in my life's work. We broke apart moments later, breathless, the ambient hum of the servers vibrating in the space between us. We formed a company the next morning. We named it Synapse Tech. Joe wanted to name it Buggy Wonderland. I put an end to that quickly. The development of the hardware followed rapidly. Joseph designed physical microchips that mirrored the physical structure of the insect mushroom body. The chips utilized 3-dimensional stacking of microscopic logic gates, mimicking the dense cluster of synapses in a bee's brain. We integrated these chips into a swarm of 50 small, quadrotor drones. We programmed the drones using the chitin language, instilling them with the digitized flocking and foraging instincts of the Apis mellifera. 9 months after Charlie fired me, we rented a massive exhibition hall at the annual Global Tech Symposium in San Francisco. Synapse Tech remained entirely unknown. We had no marketing budget and no venture capital backing. We simply paid for a central booth and erected a massive, transparent mesh enclosure. The convention floor hummed with thousands of tech journalists, investors, and engineers. Flashy displays showcased incremental upgrades to smartphones and slightly faster processing architectures. Joseph and I stood inside our mesh enclosure. I wore a sharp black blazer and dark jeans. Joseph wore his signature dark t-shirt and a tailored jacket. 50 small black drones sat dormant on a table in the center of the enclosure. At noon, the main convention organizer announced the start of the primary demonstrations. A small crowd gathered around our booth, mostly drawn by the curious lack of promotional material. I picked up a microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, traditional computing relies on massive processing power to solve complex problems. Today, Synapse Tech will demonstrate a new paradigm. We have mapped the complete neural connectome of the honeybee and translated that biological map into a proprietary computer language. We have given silicon the gift of biological instinct. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I saw several journalists raising their cameras. These 50 drones do not possess a central server, I continued. They have no external Wi-Fi connection. They are not following a pre-programmed flight path. Each drone is equipped with our proprietary Hive processor. They communicate with each other using localized radio frequency pulses, exactly the way a hive communicates. I will now introduce an obstacle, and you will see them react based entirely on digitized instinct. I nodded to Joseph. He flipped a single toggle switch on his tablet. The 50 drones lifted off the table simultaneously. The sound of their rotors created a low, synchronized hum, instead of hovering in neat rows. They formed a dynamic, fluid sphere in the center of the enclosure, swirling and shifting like a flock of starlings or a swarm of angry hornets. The movement was organic, complex, and mesmerizing. I stepped up to a pneumatic cannon mounted on the edge of the enclosure. I loaded a heavy rubber ball into the barrel. I will now fire this projectile directly into the center of the swarm at 80 miles per hour, I announced. Traditional drones would require a central processor to track the object, calculate trajectories, and issue individual evasion commands, resulting in inevitable collisions. I hit the firing button. The cannon fired with a loud thump. The heavy rubber ball shot into the center of the swirling mass of drones. In a fraction of a millisecond, the entire swarm warped around the projectile. The drones closest to the ball shifted outward, communicating their movement instantly to the adjacent drones, creating a perfect, fluid tunnel for the ball to pass through. The ball struck the back of the enclosure. The swarm instantly collapsed back into its perfect, dynamic sphere. Total silence fell over the crowd. Then, the flashes started. The cameras erupted in a blinding storm of light. Shouts rang out from the journalists. The crowd surged forward, pressing against the velvet ropes. Investors scrambled for their phones. Tech bloggers began typing furiously on their laptops. We spent the next 6 hours fielding a tidal wave of questions. Engineers stared at the diagnostic readouts on Joseph's tablet, their jaws dropping as they saw the zero-latency processing speeds and the practically non-existent power draw. The Hive processor was a total revolution in autonomous systems, robotics, and logistics. Within 48 hours, Synapse Tech became the most talked-about company on the planet. The major tech conglomerates initiated a massive bidding war for our proprietary chitin language and the Hive microchip architecture. Defense contractors wanted the technology for autonomous drone swarms. Logistics companies wanted it for automated warehouse navigation. Joseph and I sat in the penthouse suite of a San Francisco hotel, looking at the spreadsheet on his laptop. A massive tech conglomerate had just offered a $3 billion acquisition deal, allowing us to retain complete creative control as CEO and Chief Technology Officer. Joseph closed the laptop. He walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city lights. I stood beside him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black velvet box. He opened the box. Resting on the black velvet was a ring. The band consisted of braided platinum and rose gold, intricately woven to resemble the double helix of a DNA strand. At the center sat a flawless, square-cut diamond, flanked by 2 small, brilliant-cut sapphires. "I built the band myself in the machine shop last week," Joseph said. his voice quiet and steady. "Buggy, you brought the spark to the warehouse. You gave the logic a soul. Marry me. Build the future with me." I looked at the ring, a physical manifestation of our perfect integration, biological elegance wrapped around unyielding structure. "Yes," I said, sliding the ring onto my finger. "Absolutely yes." 6 months later, Synapse Tech occupied a gleaming, state-of-the-art campus in the hills above Silicon Valley. The architecture of the main building drew inspiration from the hexagonal structure of a honeycomb. My office sat on the top floor, featuring walls of smart glass and a massive balcony overlooking the valley. I sat behind my sleek, black obsidian desk, reviewing the final schematics for our next-generation processor. The intercom on my desk chimed softly. "Miss Carpenter," my executive assistant said, "a Dr. Charlie Cadmus is here to see you in the main lobby. He does not have an appointment." A slow, deeply satisfying smile spread across my face. I tapped the intercom button. "Send him up, please." I stood and walked over to the massive glass terrarium occupying the right side of my office. Inside, a thriving colony of leafcutter ants moved continuously, carrying bright green fragments along their complex, self-constructed highways. I watched their perfect, unthinking efficiency. The heavy oak doors of my office swung open. Charlie stepped inside. The past year and a half had not been kind to the Dean of Biological Sciences. His custom suit looked slightly loose, hanging awkwardly on his frame. The arrogant posture he had displayed in my university lab had vanished, replaced by a tense, nervous energy. He gripped an expensive leather briefcase in his right hand. He stopped a few feet from my desk, looking around the massive, sunlit office, taking in the original artwork and the sleek technological displays. His eyes locked onto the ant terrarium, a subtle twitch pulling at the corner of his mouth. "Monica," Charlie said, attempting to project a sense of familiar authority, "you have done very well for yourself. This campus is impressive." "Dr. Cadmus," I replied, my tone perfectly neutral. I remained standing by the terrarium, forcing him to address me across the expanse of the room. "To what do I owe the pleasure of this unscheduled visit?" Charlie cleared his throat, adjusting his grip on the briefcase. "I have been following the incredible success of Synapse Tech. The scientific community is entirely shocked by your application of biological connectomes to computer architecture. The Hive processor is a monumental achievement." "You called mapping the insect neural pathways a dead end," I reminded him, my voice smooth and lethal. "You stated that counting the synapses of a fruit fly offered zero return on investment." A flush of red crept up Charlie's neck. "I lacked the interdisciplinary vision at the time. The university board placed immense pressure on me to prioritize traditional pharmaceuticals. I made a short-sighted administrative decision. I am here to rectify that." He stepped forward, placing his briefcase on my desk and popping the golden latches. He pulled out a thick stack of documents bound in heavy blue cardstock. "The university is prepared to offer you an endowed chair in the newly formed Department of Biocomputing," Charlie announced, tapping the documents. "We are offering full tenure, a massive research budget, and complete autonomy over your staff. Furthermore, I have convinced the board to offer a highly lucrative licensing agreement to integrate Synapse Tech's hardware into our supercomputing clusters." He paused, lowering his voice, attempting to inject a note of intimacy into the sterile pitch. "We made an incredible team once, Monica. We can rebuild the department together. You belong in academia. You belong back at the university." I looked down at the thick contract on my desk. The university crest sat proudly at the top of the page. It was everything I had ever wanted 10 years ago. It was the ultimate academic validation, and it was entirely worthless to me now. "Charlie," I said, walking slowly back to my desk. I picked up the contract. The paper felt heavy, loaded with the weight of bureaucratic chains and institutional politics. "You did not come here to offer me a job," I said, staring directly into his eyes. "You came here to save your own career. The university board is furious that their Dean of Biological Sciences fired the researcher who went on to create the most valuable technological patent of the decade. They realize you handed billions of dollars of intellectual property to a private entity. You are dangling this endowed chair in a desperate attempt to bring the technology back under the university's umbrella before they terminate your contract. The blood drained from Charlie's face. He opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. The polished veneer shattered completely, revealing the panicked academic bureaucrat underneath. The office doors opened again. Joseph walked in. He wore a crisp white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to the elbows, carrying a metallic prototype chassis. He paused, looking at Charlie, quickly assessing the tension in the room. Joseph walked over and stood beside me. He placed the heavy metal chassis on the desk next to the university contract. "Is there a problem here, Buggy?" Joseph asked, his voice calm, dropping a protective hand onto my waist. Charlie stared at Joseph, his eyes darting between the two of us. He recognized the man who had translated my raw data into a silicon empire. He noticed the casual intimacy of Joseph's hand resting on my waist. Finally, Charlie's gaze dropped to my left hand, resting on the surface of the desk. The afternoon sun caught the brilliant cut of the diamond, sending sharp refractions of light dancing across the obsidian surface. The braided platinum and rose gold DNA helix band sat perfectly on my finger. Charlie physically recoiled, taking a heavy step backward. The reality of the situation crashed down on him. I had not just taken my research, I had built an empire with a man who truly understood its value. "No problem, Joe," I said, keeping my eyes locked on my ex-husband. I slid the university contract across the smooth surface of the desk, pushing it toward Charlie. "Doctor, Cadmus was just leaving. We have a wedding to plan, a new processor to launch, and an entire world to restructure. I don't have the time or the inclination to save a dying university department." I placed both of my hands on the desk and leaned forward. "Take your paperwork, Charlie. The door is behind you." Charlie grabbed the contract. He fumbled the papers, shoving them roughly into his briefcase. He turned and walked out of the office, his footsteps heavy and defeated, the glass doors sealing shut behind him. I turned my head and looked up at Joseph. He smiled, leaning down to press a soft kiss against my temple. "You handled that with absolute, hardwired precision," Joseph murmured. "I simply reacted," I replied, turning my attention back to the blueprints of the next-generation microchip spread across my monitor. "It's pure instinct." The end.
It's funny. You only started calling me family once my bank account hit 8 figures. Instead of lemons, life gave me a plot of dirt and a family that mocked me. Instead of lemonade, I made millions. The principle still applies, right? Modern Queen Tales presents My Empire of Dirt. Ahem. Mr. Birkin cleared his throat. The sound echoed sharply against the heavy silence of his mahogany-panelled office. The air smelled of lemon furniture polish and the stale remnants of expensive cigars. I sat in a high-backed leather chair at the far end of the conference table. Directly across from me sat my stepbrother, Aaron, and my stepsister, Savannah. Aaron wore a bespoke navy suit and tapped a gold pen against his knee. Savannah filed her nails with a crystal emery board, her gaze fixed entirely on the flawless gloss of her manicure. My stepfather, Isaac Powell, died 3 weeks ago. He left behind a sprawling real estate empire, a fleet of vintage cars, and a family that tolerated me exclusively when legally required to do so. "We come now to the final dispensations," Mr. Birkin said. He adjusted his silver-rimmed reading glasses and looked down at the thick parchment document on his desk. "To my stepdaughter, Claire Kerrigan, I leave the entirety of Tract 42 in Oakhaven County." Aaron stopped tapping his pen. He let out a sharp, barking laugh. Savannah paused her filing. She looked up, her lips curling into a bright, vicious smile. "Tract 42, the Dust Bowl. Oh, Claire, he really did remember you." "Quiet, Savannah," Aaron said, though his own grin mirrored hers. "Claire is a landowner now. We must show respect. She owns exactly 50 acres of dead scrub brush and fractured shale. I believe the local coyote population uses it as a latrine." I kept my hands folded in my lap. I looked directly at Mr. Birkin. Is there a deed, Mr. Birkin? Yes, Miss Kerrigan. The lawyer slid a manila folder across the polished expanse of the table. The taxes are paid through the end of the year. The title is clear, and entirely in your name. I picked up the folder. The paper felt heavy and crisp. Enjoy your dirt, Claire, Aaron said. He leaned back and crossed his legs. Isaac always knew exactly what people were worth. I get the downtown commercial high-rises. Savannah gets the residential portfolio. You get a barren hole in the ground 3 hours outside the city limits. It perfectly reflects your contributions to this family. I stood up. I tucked the folder under my arm. I did not look at Aaron. I did not look at Savannah. Thank you for your time, Mr. Birkin, I said. I walked out of the office. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, sealing in the sound of their renewed laughter. I drove my 10-year-old sedan out of the city. The concrete skyline faded into suburban sprawl, which quickly gave way to endless, flat agricultural fields. By the third hour, the paved highway turned into a pitted, gravel county road. The GPS on my phone lost its signal entirely. I navigated by the faded paper map the county clerk had mailed me. The air outside the car grew thick and dry. Dust coated my windshield in a fine, powdery layer. I took a sharp left at a rusted mailbox and drove down a deeply rutted dirt path. The car bounced violently over a series of dry washouts. I parked at the edge of Tract 42. I stepped out of the car. The heat hit me instantly. The sun beat down on a sprawling expanse of cracked, pale red earth. A few twisted, grey bushes clung to life near a pile of jagged rocks. The land stretched out flat and lifeless to the horizon. The ground itself looked deeply strange. I walked onto the property. My boots crunched over the surface. The earth here felt different from the loose, sandy dirt of the surrounding fields. I knelt down. I dug my fingers into the top layer. The soil felt dense, heavy. I scooped up a handful. The colour caught my eye immediately. It possessed a rich, uniform, rust-red hue, shot through with microscopic, glittering flecks of silver. I squeezed the handful of dirt. It compacted instantly. I opened my hand. The dirt retained the exact shape of my grip. It formed a solid, unyielding clump. I stood up and dropped the clump onto a flat rock. Instead of shattering into dust, the clump hit the rock with a dull thud and rolled onto the ground, entirely intact. I crouched back down. I pulled a small trowel from the trunk of my car and dug a hole a foot deep. The soil composition remained perfectly consistent. Dense, heavy, cohesive, and practically vibrating with mineral density. I filled 3 heavy-duty plastic bags with the red dirt. I sealed them, loaded them into my trunk, and drove straight back to the city. The fluorescent lights of the University Materials Testing Lab buzzed overhead. Dr. Luke Holtz, the head of the geology department, and an old friend from my undergraduate days, poured the contents of my third plastic bag into a stainless steel testing tray. Luke adjusted his safety goggles and leaned over the tray. He rubbed the soil between his gloved thumb and forefinger. He placed a small sample under a high-powered electron microscope. He ran a second sample through a mass spectrometer. I stood by the metal counter, watching the readouts on his computer monitor spike and settle into steep graphs. Luke turned around. He pulled off his goggles and stared at me. "Where did you find this, Claire?" he asked. "Tract 42, Oakhaven County, 50 acres of it." Luke pointed to the computer screen. "This is a naturally occurring aluminosilicate deposit. The concentration of iron oxide gives it that red colour. The silver flecks are a unique form of raw crystalline silica. Furthermore, the natural moisture content and the specific pH balance create a spontaneous binding effect." I stepped closer to the screen. I read the chemical breakdowns. "What does that mean in practical terms, Luke?" "It means you have 50 acres of pure, raw, ready-to-press geopolymer," Luke said. His voice carried a sharp edge of pure excitement. "Claire, standard construction bricks require clay. You have to mine the clay, transport it, mix it with water and shale, extrude it, and fire it in a kiln at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It takes massive amounts of energy. It produces tons of carbon emissions. The traditional brick industry is expensive and slow. He picked up a handful of the red dirt from the tray. He squeezed it into a solid ball and held it up. This material requires zero firing, Luke said. You add a fractional percentage of an alkaline activator, basically liquid lye, and you apply mechanical pressure. That is the entire process. The silica and the aluminosilicates bond instantly at room temperature. They form a crystalline lattice structure. The resulting block cures in the sun in 24 hours. I looked at the ball of dirt in his hand. How strong is it? Luke walked over to a hydraulic testing press in the corner of the lab. He took the clump of dirt he had just squeezed, placed it in a small steel mold, added a single drop of a clear chemical solution from a dropper bottle, and pulled the lever on the press. The machine whined, applying 10,000 pounds of pressure. Luke released the press. He pulled out a perfect, smooth, rust-red cylinder. He set it on the table. He picked up a standard steel claw hammer. He swung the hammer down with all his strength, directly onto the red cylinder. The hammer struck the cylinder with a deafening crack. The hammer bounced off. The cylinder sat on the table. A tiny, imperceptible scratch marked the impact point. The rest of the structure remained absolutely flawless. A standard fired clay brick has a compressive strength of roughly 3,000 pounds per square inch, Luke said. He picked up the cylinder and handed it to me. It felt heavy, cold, and solid as cast iron. This material, pressed and cured, will hit 10,000 psi. It is fireproof, waterproof, and completely resistant to seismic fracturing. You own 50 acres of the most advanced building material on the planet, waiting to be scooped up and pressed. I looked down at the smooth red stone in my hand. I felt the weight of it. I saw the immediate future, unspooling clearly in front of my eyes. I need an industrial mold, a mechanical press, and 50 gallons of alkaline activator, I said. I start manufacturing tomorrow. I drained my personal savings account. The total came to exactly $22,000. I spent $8,000 renting a heavy-duty, diesel-powered, hydraulic block press. I spent $4,000 on a flatbed delivery truck. I spent $3,000 on raw industrial lye and mixing vats. I spent the rest on a used backhoe. I drove the convoy of machinery out to Oak Haven County on a Tuesday morning. I hired 3 local farmhands from the neighboring town. Their names were Kevin, Jason, and Conrad. I paid them double the local hourly rate, in cash. We set up the operation in the center of the 50-acre tract. The process functioned with brutal, beautiful simplicity. I drove the backhoe. I scooped the raw red earth directly from the ground and dumped it into a massive steel hopper. Kevin managed the hopper, feeding the dirt onto a conveyor belt. The belt carried the dirt into the mixing vat. Jason monitored the vat, adding the precise ratio of alkaline activator solution. The moistened, activated earth fed directly into the hydraulic press. Conrad operated the press. The press slammed down with a mechanical rhythm. Ka-chunk. Hiss. Ka-chunk. Hiss. Every 10 seconds, the machine ejected 4 perfect, interlocking, rust-red bricks. We stacked them on wooden pallets under the blazing sun. The chemical reaction generated heat. I could feel the warmth radiating off the pallets as I walked past them. By Wednesday evening, the first batch of 1,000 bricks had fully cured. I picked one up from the top of the stack. The edges felt razor-sharp. The surface felt smooth and dense. The brick weighed exactly 8 pounds. It possessed a locking lip on the bottom and a receiving groove on the top. I stacked 5 bricks together. They locked into place with a satisfying, precise click. The wall segment stood perfectly rigid. It required no mortar. The natural polymer bonds and the interlocking design held the structure with absolute structural integrity. By Friday afternoon, we had manufactured 10,000 bricks. The pallets covered a 1/4 acre of the property. The raw materials cost me virtually nothing. The machinery rental and labor cost me a few $1,000s. The inventory sitting on my land represented pure, untapped profit. I loaded a single pallet of 500 bricks onto the flatbed truck. I wrapped them tightly in industrial plastic wrap. I strapped them down. I drove the truck back to the city. I drove directly to the corporate headquarters of Zenith Development. Zenith Development handled the largest municipal construction contracts in the state. They built schools, hospitals, and high-density residential complexes. The CEO, a man named Thomas Baxter, was known for his aggressive cost-cutting measures and his utter lack of patience. I parked the flatbed truck in the loading zone, directly in front of the glass-fronted Zenith Tower. I walked into the lobby. I carried a single red brick in my right hand. I walked past the receptionist. I ignored the security guard calling after me. I stepped into the executive elevator and hit the button for the top floor. I walked out of the elevator and straight into Thomas Baxter's corner office. Powell sat behind a massive glass desk, examining a set of blueprints. He looked up, his brow furrowing in instant anger. "Who are you? How did you get up here?" Powell demanded. He reached for his phone. I walked up to his glass desk. I placed the red brick directly on top of the blueprints. "My name is Claire Kerrigan. I own Kerrigan Materials. I manufacture the most advanced, cost-effective, structural brick in the world, and I can supply your next 10 projects at 40% below your current materials cost." Powell stopped reaching for the phone. He looked at the brick. He looked at me. He let out a harsh breath. "I buy my masonry from National Clay. I have a locked-in supply chain. I don't buy novelty rocks from people who break into my office. National Clay charges you $1.20 per standard fired brick," I said, reciting the figures I had memorized on the drive. "Their bricks require mortar. They require specialized masons to lay. They chip in transit. They have a failure rate of 4% under standard load-bearing tests." I picked up the red brick. I handed it to him. Powell took it. His arm dipped slightly under the unexpected weight. He ran his fingers over the smooth surface and the interlocking grooves. "I sell these for 60 cents a unit," I said. "They require zero mortar. They interlock. A general laborer can stack them 3 times faster than a master mason can lay standard brick. They have a compressive strength of 10,000 psi. They are fireproof to 3,000 degrees. Powell set the brick down on his desk. He leaned back in his chair. The anger vanished from his face, replaced by a sharp, calculating focus. "Those are impossible numbers," Powell said. "Nothing comes out of a mold with 10,000 psi without kiln firing. The energy costs alone make 60 cents a unit a fantasy. I don't fire them, I press them cold," I said. "The material is a naturally occurring geopolymer. The chemical reaction creates the strength. The curing happens at room temperature. I have 50 acres of the raw material. I can press 1,000,000 bricks a month starting right now. I have 500 of them sitting on a flatbed truck out front." Powell stood up. He walked over to the brick. He picked up a heavy brass paperweight from his desk. He slammed the paperweight down on the corner of the brick. The brass paperweight dented. The red brick remained flawless. Powell stared at the dented brass in his hand. He looked down at the brick. He looked at me. "Bring the truck around to the testing yard," Powell said. "If my engineers verify your load-bearing claims, and if these things actually lock together without mortar, I will write you a check today for an initial order of 500,000 units." I nodded. "I will meet you in the yard." The testing yard sat behind the Zenith headquarters. A team of 3 structural engineers in hard hats circled the pallet of my red bricks. They unloaded 50 units. They stacked them into a 6-foot wall segment in less than 3 minutes. The interlocking grooves slid together with perfect precision. The lead engineer backed a forklift up to the freestanding wall. He accelerated and rammed the steel forks directly into the center of the structure. A standard mortar wall would have collapsed instantly. The red wall shuddered. The interlocking joints absorbed the kinetic energy. The forklift bounced back. The wall remained standing, entirely structurally sound. The engineer climbed down from the forklift. He walked up to the wall. placed a specialized sonic density meter against the surface, and read the output. He turned to Thomas Baxter, who stood next to me. "Density is uniform," the engineer said. "No internal fracturing. The shear strength is off the charts. Mr. Powell, this material outperforms high-grade poured concrete." Powell pulled a checkbook from his breast pocket. He rested it on the hood of my flatbed truck. He pulled out a pen. 500,000 units, Powell said. "Delivered to the riverfront residential project site by the end of the month. At 60 cents a unit," I said. $300,000. I require a 50% deposit up front to scale my manufacturing equipment. Powell wrote the check. He tore it out of the book and handed it to me. $150,000, Powell said. "Get me my bricks, Kerrigan." I looked at the check. The ink shone wet and black in the afternoon sun. I folded the check and put it in my pocket. "You will have them in 2 weeks, I said. I returned to Tract 42 the next morning. I drove a brand new, heavy-duty pickup truck. I brought a cashier's check for $100,000 to the local heavy machinery dealer. I purchased 3 industrial-grade, fully automated hydraulic presses. I bought 2 massive front-end loaders. I hired a crew of 30 men. The barren expanse of Tract 42 transformed immediately into a massive industrial foundry. We operated 24 hours a day. The floodlights illuminated the red dust night and day. The front-end loaders tore into the earth, feeding a continuous stream of raw geopolymer into the hoppers. The 3 automated presses slammed down with rhythmic, earth-shaking force. The pallets of red bricks multiplied across the landscape, forming vast, geometric canyons of curing stone. The logistics flowed perfectly. Zenith Development sent a fleet of transport trucks every morning. They loaded the cured pallets, drove them to the riverfront project, and returned empty the next day. The money poured into my newly established corporate accounts. Within the first month, the riverfront project went up in record time. The interlocking bricks eliminated the need for specialized masons, cutting labor costs by 60%. The structural integrity of the buildings exceeded municipal safety codes by a massive margin. Word spread through the commercial development sector instantly. The math stood undeniable. My material was stronger, faster to build with, and drastically cheaper than anything else on the market. By the end of the second month, my phone rang constantly. Major developers from across the state demanded supply contracts. I signed a $2 million deal with Stratton Construction for a hospital wing. I signed a $4 million contract with Stratton Builders for a sprawling suburban housing development. I purchased the adjacent 200 acres of land. I tested the soil. The geopolymer deposit extended deep beneath the neighboring properties. I bought the land for pennies. I expanded the foundry. I brought in 10 more automated presses. I hired 100 more workers. I paved the dirt road leading to the site. I built a sleek, steel and glass administrative office overlooking the massive quarry. I sat at my desk on a Friday afternoon, exactly 3 months after the will reading. I pulled up my financial dashboard. On my monitor, the Kerrigan Materials operating account held $8.5 million in liquid capital. We held $20 million in backlogged, signed contracts. The operation generated pure, continuous profit. My assistant, a highly efficient woman named Sarah, knocked on the open door of my office. "Miss Kerrigan," Sarah said, "you have visitors at the front gate. They are demanding entry. They claim to be your family." I looked up from the monitor. "Let them in, Sarah. Have security escort them directly to my office." Erin and Savannah walked into my office. Security guards flanked them. Erin wore the same bespoke navy suit, but his face looked pale and tight. Savannah clutched a designer handbag tightly against her chest. Her eyes darted around the sleek office, taking in the expensive furniture, the massive windows overlooking the sprawling, hyperactive manufacturing facility, and the endless fleets of trucks loading pallets of red bricks. Aaron stopped in front of my desk. He placed both hands on the polished wood surface. "We need to talk, Claire," Aaron said. His voice lacked its usual arrogant drawl. It sounded strained, thin. "Speak," I said. I leaned back in my chair. "The commercial high-rises Isaac left me," Aaron began, swallowing hard. "The structural foundations are failing. The municipal inspectors found severe concrete degradation. The repair costs are catastrophic. The banks are threatening to call in the loans." Savannah stepped forward. "And the residential properties. The property taxes skyrocketed, and the maintenance costs have drained the operating accounts. We are facing insolvency." I looked at them. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no residual anger. Just a cold, clear sense of finality. "We saw the news in the financial journals," Aaron said. He gestured toward the window. "This operation, the Kerrigan brick. You revolutionized the market. You are sitting on tens of millions of dollars." "I am sitting on tract 42, I said. "The Dust Bowl, the Coyote latrine." Aaron flinched. Savannah opened her mouth, closed it, and looked down at her shoes. "Claire, we are family," Aaron said. He forced a smile. It looked completely broken. "Isaac left this land to you as part of the family estate. Legally, the mineral rights could be construed as shared assets. We are prepared to offer you a partnership. We consolidate the real estate portfolio with your manufacturing firm. We form a conglomerate. We share the profits." I opened the top drawer of my desk. I pulled out the original manila folder Mr. Birkin had handed me 3 months ago. I opened it. I slid the deed across the desk. Aaron looked at the paper. "Read the title," I said. Aaron read it. "Claire Kerrigan. Sole ownership. There are no shared assets. There is no conglomerate," I said. I picked the deed back up and returned it to the drawer. I shut the drawer with a sharp, echoing snap. "You received the empire you believed you deserved. You mismanaged it into ruin in 90 days. I received 50 acres of dirt. I built a multi-million-dollar corporation with my own hands. You possess nothing I need. You possess nothing I want." "Claire, please," Savannah said, her voice cracking. "We will lose everything." "You already lost it," I said. I looked at the security guards. "Escort them off my property. If they return, have them arrested for trespassing." The guards stepped forward. They grasped Aaron and Savannah by the arms. Aaron opened his mouth to shout, but the guard pulled him firmly toward the door. Savannah stumbled backward, her face white with shock. They dragged them out of the office. The heavy glass door swung shut behind them. I stood up from my desk. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window. The sun set over the Oakhaven horizon, casting a brilliant orange glow over the landscape. Below me, the massive mechanical presses slammed down into the red earth. The sound reverberated through the glass, a steady, powerful rhythm. Ka-chunk, hiss. Trucks lined up for miles, waiting to carry my product across the state. The ground itself yielded a fortune with every passing second. I looked out over the empire I built from the dirt beneath my feet. I watched the machines carve away the earth, pressing it into perfect, unyielding form. The process ran flawlessly. The rewards multiplied endlessly. I owned the land. I owned the process. I owned the future. The end.
A bruise, a kiss, and your dying words. Not how I thought I'd be paid for this case. Modern Queen Tales presents Such is Death. Chapter 1. The San Isidro Blood. The blood on the Persian rug in the CEO's office was already turning the color of dried plums. It pool spread across the intricate blue silk patterns, sticky and thick in the humid air of San Isidro. The financial district of Lima was always damp, wrapped in a gray fog that the locals called the donkey's belly. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of Royal Corp's penthouse suite, the high-rise buildings of the city looked like dirty teeth rising out of the mist. I knelt beside the stain, pressing the tip of my gloved index finger into the edge of the dark pool. The blood was cold. Hector Aliaga, the night guard, had been dead for 6 hours. His body was already gone, carted off to the central morgue, but the smell of his sudden departure remained. It was a sharp mix of copper, voided bowels, and cheap lavender cologne. "The police are done with the physical sweep," a voice said behind me. Rather than turning around immediately, I closed my eyes, letting my fingers savor the dry texture of the high-end rug. At 30 years old, I knew how to read a room by what was left behind. In Tokyo, Nagano Ayako, had been a rising star in the Metropolitan Police Department. Then came the fentanyl, the sleepless nights, the rainy highway, and the sound of my patrol car wrapping around a concrete pillar. The department fired me before the glass was swept from my scalp. Now, I lived in Peru, working as a private investigator for the kind of wealthy expatriates and corrupt executives who trusted foreign eyes more than the local authorities. A Japanese ex-cop carried a reputation for silence and efficiency that paid my rent in Miraflores and kept me in imported cigarettes. I stood up, wiping my gloved finger against my thigh. I turned to face Marcos. Marcos was the head of Royal Corp's network security. He was a slender man of 28 with a mop of unruly brown curls that fell into his eyes. He wore an oversized gray cardigan that seemed to swallow his narrow chest, and he leaned heavily on a pair of silver forearm crutches. His right leg hung slightly limp, his foot turning inward. Behind his thick, wire-rimmed glasses, his dark eyes were wide and watery. He looked like a creature that had spent its entire life in the glow of a computer monitor. "Did they find anything on the lock?" I asked, my voice flat. "No," Marcos said. His voice was soft, carrying a slight tremor. He shifted his weight on his crutches, the metal clicking against the marble border of the room. "The CEO's private safe was opened with a physical key and the secondary biometric bypass. The thief knew the codes. He knew the guard's rounds. And the footage? I have it on my tablet," he said. He reached down, his fingers fumbling with the strap of a ruggedized leather case slung over his shoulder. He pulled out a black screen, his thumb sliding over the glass. As he stepped closer to show me, the scent of him hit me. He smelled of laundry detergent, mint gum, and the faint, sweet sweat of fear. He was standing too close. I could feel the heat radiating from his chest. I looked down and saw his eyes dart to my lips, then quickly back to the screen. He was attracted to me. It was a common reaction from men like him, the quiet, fragile ones who looked at a woman with a scar on her jaw and a gun under her arm as if she were a dark fantasy. I wouldn't acknowledge it. I needed his access codes, his fingers on the keyboard, and his absolute cooperation. His infatuation was an asset. "Watch here," Marcos whispered, pointing a thin finger at the screen. The video was black and white, high definition. The timestamp read 2:14 a.m. The hallway outside the CEO's office was empty. Then, a figure appeared from the shadow of the service alcove. The man was tall, wearing a tight black tactical jacket and a silver ballistic mask that completely obscured his face. He walked with a smooth, feline grace. In the frame, a second figure appeared from the opposite direction. It was Marcos. On the video, Marcos was hobbling along on his crutches, carrying a stack of system printouts. The masked man never hesitated. He stepped forward, drove a heavy fist into Marcos's stomach, and then kicked his crutches out from under him. The digital Marcos crashed to the floor, his head bouncing off the wall. He lay there, twitching in pain. "He hit you hard," I observed, watching the screen. "I have 2 cracked ribs," Marcos said, his hand rising to touch his side. He was incredibly fast. I didn't even see him come out of the shadows. On the screen, Hector Aliaga, the guard, stepped out of the office door, his hand reaching for his holster. The masked man was faster. He raised a suppressed pistol and fired once. Hector crumpled. The thief then stepped over Marcos's groaning form, entered the office, and emerged 3 minutes later with a small silver flash drive. Then came the anomaly. The thief walked toward the end of the corridor, toward the emergency exit staircase. The camera at the end of the hall captured his approach, but the camera inside the stairwell never registered his entry. The exterior cameras around the building showed nothing. A grown man in a silver mask had vanished into 30 feet of windowless concrete corridor. "Show me the exit footage again," I said. Marcos tapped the screen. We watched the thief walk toward the camera. He was 5 feet away, then 4, then he stepped out of the frame of the hallway camera. The stairwell camera, which should have picked him up a fraction of a second later, showed only empty gray concrete stairs. "The system didn't drop a frame," Marcos said, anticipating my question. I checked the code myself. There was no loop, no digital deletion. The feed was continuous. "People do not turn into air, Marcos." "I know," he said, looking up at me. His face was very close to mine. I could see the tiny gold flecks in his brown irises, but I can't explain it. "I can give you access to every server, every log, every camera in the building. Just tell me what you need, Ayako." "I need to see the body," I said, stepping back to break the circle of his warmth. "Let's go to the morgue." Chapter 2. The View from the Slab. The morgue of the Hospital Nacional dos de Mayo was located in a basement that felt like a tomb. The air was cold, but it did not keep the smell of decay at bay. It was a heavy, sweet odor that clung to the back of the throat like grease. The walls were covered in pale green tiles, cracked and stained with years of condensation. The medical examiner, an elderly man with yellowed fingernails, pulled out metal tray number 42. The tray slid open with a screech of ungreased rollers. Hector Aliaga lay beneath a stiff white sheet. The examiner pulled the cloth down to his chest. Hector's face was pale, his skin possessing the waxy, translucent quality of cheap soap. In the center of his forehead was a neat, circular hole, purple around the edges. Marcos stood a step behind me. The moment the sheet was pulled back, his breath caught. His face turned the color of the tiles. He leaned heavily on his crutches, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the metal handles. A thin bead of sweat rolled down his temple. I shouldn't have come," Marcos stammered, looking at the floor. "I don't like blood. It makes my stomach turn." I reached out, grabbed his jaw with my gloved hand, and forced his head up. His skin was cold, his muscles tense under my fingers. I made him look directly at the bullet hole in Hector's forehead. "Look at it," I said, my voice low and steady. "That's what death looks like. It is not clean, and it does not look like the movies. If you are going to work with me, you need to get used to the sight of it. The man who did this is still walking around this city. He has the files, and he has the gun." Marcos trembled under my grip. His eyes dilated, staring at the corpse, then down at my hand on his jaw. He swallowed hard, his throat clicking. "I understand," he whispered. I released his chin and turned back to the examiner. "Did you find any other trauma?" "Only the entry wound," the doctor said in Spanish, his voice dry. "The bullet is still inside the skull. A 9mm round. Standard. No other marks on the body." I leaned closer to the corpse. "Marcos, give me the tablet. Open the footage of the shooting. Zoom in on Hector's face." Marcos fumbled with the tablet, his fingers shaking so much he almost dropped it. He tapped the screen several times before clearing the display. He zoomed in on the guard's face in the seconds before the masked man drew his weapon. The digital image was grainy but clear enough to see the expression on Hector's face. In the hallway of Royal Corp, Hector had not looked surprised by a stranger. His eyebrows had pulled together, his lips parting in a brief, sudden realization. He had spoken a word. "Look at his mouth," I said, pointing to the screen. He wasn't shouting for help. He was saying a name. I watched the loop play 5 times. The lips parted. The tongue touched the teeth, a soft, round shape of the mouth, followed by a sharp consonant and another vowel. "Oh," I muttered, mimicking the movement. S-C-A-R, Oscar. Marcos stared at the screen, his glasses sliding down his nose. "Oscar? You think he knew the shooter?" "He knew him," I said, standing straight. "And he called him by name. That is why the shooter didn't hesitate. The moment he was recognized, Hector was a dead man." I turned to the examiner and thanked him, then led Marcos out of the cold basement. The warm, humid air of the Lima streets felt like a wet blanket after the chill of the morgue. "Who is Oscar?" I asked as we walked to my battered black sedan. Marcos adjusted his crutches, his breath still coming in short, shallow gasps. I don't know many people outside the IT department, but I can check the human resources database." "Give me a minute." He sat in the passenger seat, resting his crutches against the dashboard. His fingers flew across the tablet. The blue light reflected off his glasses, hiding his eyes. After a minute, a profile popped up on the screen. "Oscar Mendoza," Marcos said. "He was a janitor. He worked at Royal Corp for 6 years. He was fired 3 days ago." "Why?" "The report says erratic behavior and theft of cleaning supplies. But look at this. He was the night janitor for the penthouse floor. He had keys to every utility closet on the executive level." "And where does Oscar Mendoza live?" I asked, turning the key in the ignition. "Rimac," Marcos said, reading the address from the screen. "A tenement building near the river." I shifted the car into gear and pulled out into the chaotic traffic of Lima. The sun was setting, turning the gray fog into a dull orange smudge over the Pacific. Chapter 3. The Smell of Rot. The district of Rimac was a maze of crumbling colonial buildings, narrow alleys, and dusty hills. The air here was different from San Isidro. It was thick with the smell of exhaust, fried garlic, and the stagnant water of the river. The paint on the yellow concrete buildings was peeling like sunburnt skin. We parked 2 blocks away from the address. Marcos struggled out of the car, his crutches clanking against the dry dirt of the sidewalk. A group of local children stopped playing soccer to watch us. They stared at my leather jacket and Marcos's silver crutches as if we had just stepped off a spacecraft. "This place is dangerous," Marcos whispered, drawing closer to my side, his shoulder brushed against mine. He was looking around with wide, anxious eyes. "We should have brought the police." "The police in this city are busy protecting the people who pay them," I said, checking the weight of the 9mm Glock hidden under my jacket. "We are on our own." We found the building. It was a 3-story tenement with a rusting iron gate that stood half open. The interior courtyard was dark, filled with hanging laundry and the sound of a television playing a soccer match. Oscar Mendoza's apartment was on the top floor, at the end of a long concrete balcony that overlooked the courtyard. As we climbed the stairs, the smell hit us. It was not the smell of Rimac's streets. It was the smell I had encountered in Tokyo apartments when old people died alone and lay undiscovered for weeks. It was a thick, greasy stench that seemed to coat the skin. It smelled of wet leather, sulfur, and sweet, rotting fat. Marcos stopped on the second landing. He pressed his hand to his mouth, his shoulders heaving. "Oh, God," he gasped. "What is that?" "That is what death smells like," I said, my voice cutting through the humid air. "Suck it up, Marcos. We are almost there." I didn't wait for him. I walked up the final flight of stairs to room 4B. The door was wooden, the blue paint blistered by the sun. The padlock had been cut, the padlock latch hanging loose from the frame. I pushed the door open with my foot. The apartment was small, consisting of a single room with a stained mattress on the floor and a plastic table covered in empty beer bottles. Flies buzzed in a thick black cloud around the mattress. Oscar Mendoza lay on his back across the dirty sheets. He was a stocky man in his 50s, wearing a dirty white undershirt and blue trousers. His skin had turned a dark purplish gray, his abdomen bloated with gas. His eyes were wide open, staring at the cracked plaster of the ceiling, dry and cloudy like marbles. In the center of his chest was a dark, crusty hole where the blood had pooled and dried. Marcos reached the doorway and immediately turned away, leaning against the concrete railing of the balcony. I could hear him dry heaving into the courtyard below. I ignored him and entered the room. I pulled a small flashlight from my pocket and began to search. The room had been tossed, but the search had been hurried. Drawers were pulled out, clothes scattered across the floor. I knelt by the mattress, holding my breath against the stench. I slid my hand under the edge of the bed. My fingers brushed against a thick sheet of paper. I pulled it out. It was an architectural blueprint, old and yellowed at the edges. The title block in the corner read, Royal Corp Headquarters, Original Construction, 1985. I spread it out on the plastic table, ignoring the flies that landed on the paper. The blueprint showed the building before the massive remodeling project that had taken place 5 years ago. I traced my finger along the central core of the building. There was a vertical shaft, 5 feet wide, that ran from the penthouse executive restroom straight down to the basement drainage system. It was a central ventilation shaft, designed for the building's old industrial air conditioning unit. In the new blueprints, this shaft was marked as sealed with concrete. But on this old blueprint, someone had made a mark in red ink. An arrow pointed to the shaft, and beside it was written a single word in Spanish, abierto, open. I stared at the red ink. A man who knew the old layout of the building could enter the penthouse, steal the files, walk into the CEO's private bathroom, and drop down the shaft into the basement. From there, he could walk out through the sewer system directly into the Rimac River bed, completely bypassing every modern security camera in the building. But a 55-year-old janitor with a beer belly and arthritis could not slide down a 5-foot vertical concrete shaft. It required physical strength, agility, and a body that could take a hard drop. I looked out the door. Marcos was leaning against the railing, wiping his mouth with a handkerchief. His knuckles were tight on his crutches. I looked back at the blueprint. The pieces of the puzzle began to slide into place, shifting like gears in a lock. I recalled the security video. I recalled the way the masked man had struck Marcos, knocking him to the floor. The blow had looked brutal, but Marcos had survived with only 2 cracked ribs. And the Marcos on the screen had been wearing a thick cardigan, his head down, his face hidden by his long curls. I recalled the way the guard had looked at the Marcos on the ground just before the shooting. The guard had not looked at the masked man. He had looked at the man on the floor, and his lips had formed the name Oscar. The guard had recognized Oscar Mendoza, but Oscar Mendoza was not the masked man. Oscar Mendoza was the man on the floor, pretending to be Marcos. I folded the blueprint and slid it inside my jacket. I walked out of the apartment, my boot heels clicking on the concrete balcony. "Did you find anything?" Marcos asked, his voice trembling. He looked pale, his eyes wet behind his glasses. "I found enough," I said. "Let's go back to the office. I need you to run one more search for me." Chapter 4. The Blueprint of a Lie. The Royal Corp headquarters was dark when we returned. The night staff had been sent home early due to the investigation, leaving the lobby empty. The marble floor reflected the dim security lights, like black water. We took the elevator to the server room in the basement. It was a vast, cold space filled with rows of tall black racks. The hum of the servers was a constant, low vibration that rattled the fillings in my teeth. The air was dry, smelling of silicone and hot plastic. Marcos hobbled to his workstation, his crutches clicking on the raised metal floor panels. He sat down in his ergonomic chair, letting his crutches fall against the desk. He logged into the system, his fingers moving across the keyboard with a speed that did not match his clumsy physical movements. "What do you want me to search for?" he asked, not looking at me. "I want you to show me the employment contract for Oscar Mendoza," I said, standing behind him. I rested my hand on the back of his chair, leaning down so my breath brushed his ear. "And I want to see the maintenance records for the central ventilation shaft." Marcos froze. His fingers hovered over the keys, still and silent. The only sound in the room was the steady, angry roar of the server fans. "Why would you want to see that?" he asked. His voice had lost its tremor. It was flat, cold, and entirely steady. "Because Oscar Mendoza didn't steal the files," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "And he didn't slide down the concrete shaft. He was too old, too fat, and too drunk. But he knew about the shaft because he was the janitor who helped seal the building 5 years ago. Or rather, he was supposed to seal it, but he left it open for a price." Marcos remained still. He kept his eyes fixed on the screen, which showed a prompt cursor blinking in the dark. "The video was a theater production, Marcos," I continued, my hand sliding down from the chair to touch his shoulder. The muscles under his wool cardigan were not soft, they were hard as iron. "The man who got hit by the thief was not you. It was Oscar Mendoza dressed in your clothes, wearing your wig, and using your crutches. He took the fall to give you an alibi." The security guard saw him on the floor, recognized him under the wig, and said his name. "Oscar. You couldn't let the guard live after that, so you shot him." Marcos slowly turned his head to look at me. He took off his glasses. Without them, his face changed completely. The watery, weak look in his eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, dark intensity that was beautiful and terrifying. He smiled, a slow, sharp curve of his lips. "You are very smart, Ayako," he said. His voice was deeper now, devoid of the stutter. "Sweeter than I expected. Most of the people in this country are lazy. They don't look past the surface. They see a cripple, and they look away. They see a foreigner, and they assume she is just here for the money." "You killed Oscar Mendoza because he got cold feet," I said, my hand moving slowly toward my holster. He realized that a murder charge was different from a simple corporate heist. "He wanted out, so you went to his apartment and put a bullet in his chest." "Oscar was a liability," Marcos said, his hand dropping to his side. "He was a drunk. He would have talked the moment the police offered him a bottle of rum." "And the files?" Marcos reached into his cardigan. I half feared he'd pull a gun. Instead, he pulled out the silver flash drive, holding it between 2 fingers. The metal caught the blue light of the servers. "These files are not corporate secrets, Ayako," he said, his eyes locking onto mine. "They are evidence. My parents were investigative journalists. 20 years ago, they discovered that Royal Corp was using its shipping lines to import 70% of the precursor chemicals used by the local cartels. They were shot in their beds while I hid in the closet. The police called it a robbery. The CEO of Royal Corp paid for my education. He thought it was charity. I call it an investment." "So you took the job here to get the proof," I said. "I spent 5 years playing the helpless nerd," Marcos said, his voice rising above the hum of the servers. "I limped through these halls. I let them spit on me, let them mock my crutches. I built their network, and I found the back doors. These files contain the bank accounts, the shipment numbers, the names of every politician and police chief on the payroll. This is the truth, Ayako. It is the only thing that matters to me. It is still murder, I said, my fingers wrapping around the grip of my Glock. It is justice, he said. He stood up. No need for crutches anymore. He stood straight, his legs perfectly aligned, his shoulders broad and square. He was 6 feet tall, his posture athletic and balanced. The silver crutches clattered to the floor, the metal sound echoing through the cold room. I don't want to hurt you, Marco said, stepping toward me. I like you. I've watched you for weeks. You have the same dark look in your eyes that I have. You are a ghost, just like me. Come with me. We can leave this city. We can sell a fraction of this data to their competitors and live like kings in Europe. I am a cop, I said, drawing my gun and pointing it at his chest. Or at least, I used to be. Old habits die hard. You are no cop, Marcos whispered. You are just a survivor. Chapter 5. The Bitter Taste. Marcos moved before I could pull the trigger. His speed was not human. He simply vanished from my line of sight. A hard hand struck my wrist, sending a jolt of pain up my arm. My Glock flew from my fingers, clattering across the metal floor. I reacted on instinct, throwing a left hook toward his jaw. Marcos blocked it with his forearm, his movement smooth and practiced. He grabbed my jacket, using my own momentum to throw me against a server rack. My back hit the metal frame with a dull thud, knocking the air from my lungs. I gasped, my eyes watering from the impact. Marcos was already on me, pinning my arms against the rack. His body was pressed against mine, hot and heavy. His chest was broad, his muscles tight and lean under the gray cardigan. He smelled of sweat and copper now, the sweet scent of his fear gone, replaced by the raw odor of adrenaline. I told you, he whispered, his face inches from mine. I don't want to hurt you. Too bad, I spit out. I brought my knee up, hard, into his groin. He anticipated the move, shifting his hips to block it, but the distraction was enough. I freed my right arm, reached into my boot, and pulled my backup weapon, a small, double-action 5-shot revolver. I pressed the barrel against his ribs and pulled the trigger. The sound of the shot was deafening in the enclosed room. The muzzle flash illuminated his face for a fraction of a second, showing his eyes wide with surprise. Marcos gasped, a sharp, wet sound. He stumbled back, his hands clutching his side. Blood immediately began to seep through the wool of his gray cardigan, dark and thick. He fell against his desk, knocking over a stack of papers and a plastic cup of coffee. I stood up, my back aching, my hand shaking, as I pointed the small revolver at him. It's over, Marcos. He looked down at his hand, which was covered in bright red, oxygenated blood. He laughed, a wet, rattling sound. You really are a cop, he muttered in a perfect Japanese I had no idea he could speak. He refused to fall. He gathered his remaining strength, his face pale, his eyes burning with a desperate, wild light. He lunged forward, throwing his entire weight into me. We crashed to the floor together. The revolver flew from my hand, sliding into the dark space under the server racks. Marcos pinned me to the floor. His strength was fading, but his weight was immense. He held my wrists down with his hands, his grip tight despite the blood slicking his fingers. I struggled beneath him, but he was too heavy, his body locking mine in place. Ayako, he whispered. His voice was thick, his breath smelling of copper and hot iron. He lowered his head. I tried to turn my face away, but his hand moved to my chin, holding my jaw tight, just as I had held his in the morgue. He kissed me. It was not a gentle kiss. It was hard, desperate, and violent, born of pain and the sudden realization of his own end. His lips were wet with his own blood, and as he pressed them against mine, the taste of iron filled my mouth. It was bitter, sharp, and cold, like sucking on a copper coin. His grip relaxed, his body went soft, his chest sinking against mine with a long, rattling sigh. His head fell onto my shoulder, his dark curls brushing against my cheek. "That's," Marcos whispered, his voice fading into the hum of the servers. "That's what death tastes like." He did not move again. I lay there for a long time under his weight, the cold metal floor beneath us, the hum of the servers above us. The blood from his chest soaked through my shirt, warm and sticky, before turning cold in the air-conditioned room. Finally, I pushed his body off me. He lay on his back, his eyes open, staring at the ceiling of the server room. Without his glasses, his face looked young, peaceful, and entirely empty. I stood up, my bones aching. I found the silver flash drive lying on the desk. I picked it up, its cold metal surface feeling heavy in my hand. I could have called the police. Maybe I should have, but I did not. I walked out of the building into the cold, damp air of the San Isidro night. I went back to my apartment in Miraflores, packed my single suitcase, and sat at my computer. I uploaded every file on the silver drive to the servers of 3 major international news agencies, the Department of Justice in Washington, and the central offices of the Peruvian National Press. By morning, the name Royal Corp would be synonymous with death, drugs, and corruption. I bought a one-way ticket to Tokyo. As the plane climbed into the gray fog over the Pacific, I looked down at the city of Lima disappearing beneath the clouds. The taste of copper was still in my mouth, and I knew it was a flavor I would never be able to wash away. The end. Modern Queen Tales presents Glemfeld to Brighton, A Witch's Mother. The chanting started as a low murmur, a vibration through the floorboards of our small, drafty cottage in Glemfeld. I pulled 6-year-old Andrea close to my side. We sat on the braided rug in the center of the living room, surrounded by the meager belongings we'd managed to accumulate since arriving in this desolate town 3 years ago. The chanting grew louder, transforming into distinct, harsh syllables. "Witch! Witch! Bring out the witch!" The voices belonged to our neighbors, people I'd traded eggs with, whose children Andrea occasionally played with near the town well. The mob had formed quickly. I crept toward the window and peeked through a crack in the shutters. Torchlight flickered against the peeling paint of our exterior walls. Claude Schultz, the town mayor, stood at the front of the crowd, his face twisted into a snarl, a heavy wooden club resting on his shoulder. "Delilah Sharon!" Claude's voice boomed above the noise. "Your spawn has brought ruin to Glemfeld. The crops fail, the mines are dry, and the sickness spreads. The elders have spoken. The witch must burn, and you with her," Andrea whimpered, burying her face in my apron. I stroked her dark curls, my hands trembling. We had no back door. The only exit was blocked by 100 angry townspeople armed with pitchforks, torches, and malice. The banging on the front door began. The heavy oak shuddered under the impact of a makeshift battering ram. Dust rained down from the ceiling rafters. I grabbed the heavy cast-iron skillet from the cold hearth, my knuckles white around the handle. I stood in front of Andrea, a desperate, futile shield against the inevitable. The door splintered. A jagged crack appeared down the middle. 2 sharp cracks, loud as thunder, echoed through the night. The sound of wood splintering stopped. The chanting ceased. I held my breath. Through the crack in the door, I saw the crowd part. A woman strode forward. She was tall, broad-shouldered, with a long, jagged scar cutting across her left cheek. She held a heavy, smoking rifle casually in one hand. She chewed on the end of an unlit cigar. Behind her walked a man. He wore a long, deep blue coat tailored with silver thread. His hair was silver, his eyes a piercing amber. He moved with a relaxed grace, a stark contrast to the rigid tension of the mob. "Good evening, citizens of Glemfeld," the man said. His voice was smooth, cultured, carrying effortlessly over the stunned silence. "I am Archon Rome. This is my associate, Broomhilda." He gestured slightly toward the scarred woman. We couldn't help but notice a disturbance. "This is none of your business, stranger," Claude spat, recovering his bravado. "We have a witch to deal with. Step aside." Arkan sighed, adjusting the cuffs of his coat. "A witch? A 6-year-old child? Surely, Mayor Schultz, you understand the economic realities of Glemfeld's decline. The depleted silver veins, the poor soil management, these are matters of industry and agriculture, not sorcery." "Words!" a man in the crowd yelled. He lunged forward, raising a rusty scythe toward Arkan. Broomhilda didn't even blink. She shifted her stance, brought the rifle up, and fired. The man shrieked, clutching his thigh. Blood bloomed rapidly against his trousers. He collapsed, writhing in the dirt. The silence that followed was absolute. Broomhilda lowered the rifle, resting the barrel on her shoulder. "The next one goes between the eyes," she said flatly. "Who wants to argue with the intellectual again?" The mob dissolved. Torches hit the dirt, sputtering out. Footsteps retreated rapidly into the darkness. Within seconds, only Claude remained, staring at the bleeding man on the ground. He glared at Archon, then at Broomhilda, before turning and practically sprinting back toward the center of town. Broomhilda nudged the wounded man with her boot. "Get up, tie off the leg, walk it off." The man scrambled away, dragging his injured leg behind him. Arkan turned toward our broken door. "Miss Charon, may we come in?" I lowered the skillet, my arms aching. I pulled the heavy wooden bar away from the door, the splintered wood catching on my palms. Arkan stepped inside, ducking slightly to avoid the low doorframe. Broomhilda followed, scanning the room, her rifle still at the ready. Arkan's amber eyes swept over our meager surroundings before settling on Andrea, who peered out from behind my skirt. "A fascinating display of local politics," Arkan observed, brushing a speck of dust from his sleeve. "I apologize for the late hour. I've recently acquired the neighboring township of Brighton." "Acquired?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Purchased," Arkan clarified. "The land, the buildings, the infrastructure. I understand you've experienced some difficulties here." Rumors reached me of a child with unusual abilities. I specialize in the unusual. He knelt, bringing himself down to Andrea's eye level. He smiled. It was a genuine, warm expression. "Hello, Andrea. My name is Arkan. May I see?" Andrea looked up at me. I nodded slowly. She stepped forward. She raised her small hand, her fingers curling into a specific shape. The air in front of her shimmered. A low growl vibrated in the room. A creature materialized. It was roughly the size of a large dog, covered in coarse, matted gray fur. It had a blunt snout, eyes that glowed a sickly yellow, and long, curved claws that clicked against the floorboards. I screamed, snatching Andrea back, pulling her tightly against my chest. Broomhilda swore, raising her rifle, the barrel aimed squarely at the creature's head. Arkan laughed, a bright, delighted sound. He stepped closer to the beast. The creature lunged, jaws snapping, aiming for Arkan's throat. Arkan simply raised his hand and snapped his fingers. The sound was sharp, precise. The creature vanished. Not a puff of smoke, not a fading image. It was simply gone. "Incredible," Arkan murmured, his eyes wide. "Raw, instinctive summoning. No focal point, No incantation, pure intent. He turned to me. She has tremendous potential, Miss Charon. Left untrained, she is a danger to herself and anyone nearby. What do you want? I demanded, my heart still hammering against my ribs. I offer you both sanctuary, Arcan said simply. Residency in my castle in Brighton. I will provide proper training for Andrea. She needs a master to guide her, to teach her control. You will have a safe home, far from the Mayor Schultz of the world. The offer hung in the air. I looked at the broken door, the dirt floor, the fear still lingering in my daughter's eyes. Then I looked at Archon, offering a lifeline. We accept, I said, but on one condition. I will not be a burden. I need to protect her too. I turned to Broomhilda. Can you teach me to use that? I pointed at the rifle. Broomhilda shifted the unlit cigar to the other side of her mouth. She looked me up and down. You'll get bruises, she warned. Your ears will ring, and you have to clean your own weapon. I can handle it, I said. Good, Broomhilda grunted. We leave at first light. The journey to Brighton took 3 days by horse-drawn carriage. The landscape changed dramatically once we crossed the town border. Glemfeld was a dusty, barren bowl. Brighton was lush, green, and thriving. Neat houses lined cobblestone streets. People waved as our carriage passed. Archon's castle sat on a hill overlooking the town. It was a massive structure of dark stone, with tall spires and wide windows. Welcome home, Arcan said as the carriage rolled into the courtyard. The next few years settled into a rigorous, demanding routine. Life in the castle was entirely focused on discipline and practice. Mornings belonged to Broomhilda. My days started before sunrise on the firing range set up behind the castle walls. Broomhilda handed me a heavy bolt-action rifle on my first day. The recoil slammed into my shoulder, knocking me backward. The sound deafened me. Stance is wrong, Broomhilda stated, handing me another cartridge. Feet shoulder-width apart. Lean into it. Keep both eyes open. I shot until my shoulder turned purple and yellow. I learned to strip the weapon, clean the barrel, oil the mechanism, and reassemble it blindfolded. I moved from stationary targets to moving ones, learning to compensate for wind and distance. Broomhilda was a harsh instructor, offering corrections instead of praise, but under her guidance, the heavy rifle became an extension of my arm. I learned to carry a sidearm, a heavy revolver, practicing drawing and firing until the motion was fluid. Afternoons belonged to Archon and Andrea. I often sat in the castle library, observing their lessons. Archon sat opposite Andrea, a heavy leather-bound book open between them. Focus, Andrea, Archon instructed, his voice calm. The energy must have a shape, a container. If you simply release it, the result is chaotic. Andrea concentrated, her brow furrowed. She brought her hands together. A small, glowing orb of light appeared between her palms. It flickered, pulsed, and then stabilized. Excellent, Archon praised. Now, manipulate the color. The orb shifted from white to blue, then to a deep red. The training was intense, but outside the lessons, I quickly discovered a glaring problem. Arcan, the powerful sorcerer, the owner of a town, was incapable of basic domestic survival. His study was a disaster zone. Books formed precarious towers on every flat surface. Empty teacups lined the windowsill, growing mold. He frequently forgot to eat, unless meals were placed directly in front of him. His impressive blue coat often bore evidence of spilled ink or careless eating. I took charge. Arcan, I said one evening, standing in the doorway of his study, a basket of clean laundry balanced on my hip. He looked up from a massive tome, blinking as if trying to remember who I was. Yes, Delilah. The teacups, I pointed. They need to go to the kitchen, and you have an ink stain on your cuff. He looked at the cuff, then at the teacups. Ah, I suppose they do. I was occupied with the translation of I don't care about the translation, I interrupted. I care about the mold. Gather the cups. He sighed, marking his place in the book, and began carefully balancing the delicate porcelain cups. I established a schedule. I organized the library, cataloging the books and clearing the workspaces. I ensured meals were served at regular intervals and insisted Arkan join us at the dining table. The constant proximity fostered a shift in our dynamic. I spent my mornings learning violence from Broomhilda and my afternoons enforcing order on Arkan's chaos. We spent evenings by the fire in the main hall. Andrea often read or practiced small illusions. Broomhilda usually cleaned her weapons or played a complex game of solitaire. Arkan and I talked. We discussed the town. The people of Brighton were grateful to Arkan. His purchase of the land had brought resources, trade, and stability. The town square buzzed with activity. We visited often, buying fresh bread and produce. The townspeople greeted us warmly, offering Andrea sweets and asking Arkan for advice on minor dispute. One evening, Arkan stood near the hearth, watching Andrea weave a ribbon of blue light between her fingers. She's progressing faster than I anticipated, he said, his voice low. She works hard, I replied, folding a blanket. Arkan turned to me. You both work hard. You've brought structure to this place, Delilah. To me. He stepped closer. The firelight caught the silver threads in his coat. He reached out, his fingers lightly brushing a strand of hair back from my face. His touch was warm. I appreciate you, he murmured. I looked up into his amber eyes. Being here, Arkan, is the best thing that could have happened to us, to me. He leaned in, his lips brushing against mine. The kiss was gentle, tentative at first, then firmer. I responded, leaning into his warmth. The heavy responsibility I carried seemed to lighten, just for a moment. We became a family, a strange, powerful, unconventional family. Arkan, the brilliant, slightly oblivious sorcerer. Broomhilda, the scarred, silent protector. Me, the organizer and marksman. And Andrea, the focal point, growing stronger and more controlled every day. The peace lasted for 3 years. Andrea was 9. She could summon complex, helpful entities, creatures of light that illuminated dark corridors, or small, winged beings that carried messages. My aim was true. My reloading times flawless. Arkan's study remained relatively clean. The attack came on a Tuesday. Broomhilda burst into the library during Andrea's lesson. She simply racked the bolt on her rifle. Arkan stood up, his relaxed demeanor instantly vanishing. What is it? Dust cloud on the southern road, Broomhilda stated. Large group, armed, moving fast. I grabbed my rifle from the corner and checked the chamber. Glemfeld? Looks like it, Broomhilda confirmed. They've brought wagons. They're coming to stay, or to burn. Jealousy, Arkan said bitterly. Brighton thrives while Glemfeld rots. They want what we have built. We need to protect the town, I said, moving toward the door. Arkan nodded. Broomhilda, Delilah, head to the town square. Organize an evacuation. Get everyone up the hill and inside the castle walls. I will follow. I sprinted down the cobblestone road, my boots pounding against the stones. Broomhilda kept pace effortlessly. The town square was already in a panic. The dust cloud was clearly visible now, a thick, brown smear against the clear sky. Everyone, I shouted, firing a single round into the air. The crack silenced the rising panic. Gather your families! Move to the castle! Now! Broomhilda directed the flow of people, her sheer physical presence enforcing order. We herded the bakers, the blacksmith, the children, and the elderly up the steep path to the castle gates. I stood by the heavy iron portcullis, waving the last of the stragglers inside. Arkan arrived, standing beside me, his hands glowing with a faint, pulsing blue energy. The Glemfeld mob appeared at the edge of the town. There were hundreds of them. They carried torches, pitchforks, heavy axes, and crude firearms. Claude Schultz led them, riding a sway-backed horse. "Burn it all!" Claude roared. "Take their food! Take their gold!" The mob surged forward, attacking the first row of houses, smashing windows and setting fire to thatched roofs. "No," Arkan said quietly. He raised both hands. The blue energy flared violently. A massive, invisible force slammed into the front ranks of the mob. Dozens of men were thrown backward, crashing into the people behind them. The charge halted instantly. Broomhilda knelt behind a low stone wall near the gate. Her rifle cracked. A man holding a torch near a wooden storefront dropped, the torch falling harmlessly into a water trough. She chambered another round. Crack! Another man, carrying a heavy axe, fell. I took position next to her, resting my rifle on the stone. I sighted a man raising a crude musket toward Arkan. I squeezed the trigger. The man spun and fell. We established a rhythm. Arkan controlled the crowd with broad waves of concussive force, knocking down anyone who tried to organize a charge. Broomhilda and I provided precise, lethal overwatch, eliminating specific threats: anyone with a firearm, anyone carrying fire toward a building. The attack turned into a siege. The Glemfeld mob realized they couldn't breach the castle defenses or pass the devastating crossfire we established. They retreated to the edge of town, setting up a crude camp, maintaining a constant, harassing presence. For 2 days we defended Brighton. The townspeople huddled inside the castle, safe but terrified. Broomhilda, Arkan, and I slept in shifts on the castle walls. We repelled minor probing attacks, extinguished small fires set near the walls, and conserved our ammunition. On the third morning, I sat with Arkan in the main hall. Andrea sat nearby, her face pale, exhaustion evident in her posture. "This is unsustainable," Arkan said, rubbing his eyes. "We can hold them off indefinitely, but the town is suffering. The crops are unharvested, the shops are closed, the people are frightened." "They won't leave," I said, cleaning my revolver. "Claude has them convinced we stole their prosperity. They'll starve us out or wait for us to make a mistake." Andrea looked up. "We have to make them stop." Arkan looked at her, then at me. "She's right. Defense is a temporary solution. We need a definitive conclusion." "We attack," Broomhilda stated, walking into the hall, a fresh, unlit cigar in her mouth. "We hit the camp." "No," Arkan said. "A direct assault will result in massive casualties on both sides. I will not turn Brighton into a slaughterhouse." "Then what?" I asked. Arkan looked at Andrea. "We give them a reason to never return." We spent the afternoon preparing. Arkan and Andrea sat in the center of the courtyard, chalk circles drawn on the stone. Arkan explained the complex geometric patterns, the necessary flow of energy, the precise mental image required. At dusk, we moved to the highest point of the castle wall, overlooking the Glemfeld camp. Fires dotted the landscape below. We could hear the faint sounds of arguing and the clanking of weapons. "Are you ready, Andrea?" Arkan asked. Andrea nodded, her face set in a look of grim determination. Arkan placed his hands on her shoulders. "Focus on the image, the scale, the terror. I will provide the raw power. You provide the form." The air around them dropped 10 degrees. The sky above the castle darkened rapidly, a thick, swirling mass of black clouds forming out of nowhere. A sharp, strong, citric smell filled the air. Arkan began chanting, a low, resonant language that vibrated in my chest. The blue energy flared around his hands, flowing into Andrea. Andrea raised her hands toward the sky. The clouds split. A massive tear appeared in the fabric of the air, directly above the Glemfeld camp. A roar echoed across the valley, a sound so loud it rattled the stones beneath my feet. From the tear in the sky, a creature descended. It was gargantuan, easily the size of a 3-story building. It resembled a massive, heavily armored serpent, with thick, jade scales that absorbed the light. Its head was a nightmare of jagged bone and glowing red eyes. It hit the ground near the Glemfeld camp with the force of an earthquake. The ground buckled, tents collapsed. The creature roared again, opening a maw lined with rows of razor-sharp teeth. It did not attack the people. It thrashed its massive tail, leveling a grove of trees near the camp. It reared up, its sheer size blocking out the stars, its red eyes glaring down at the terrified mob. Panic, pure and absolute, erupted in the camp. Weapons were dropped, people screamed, trampling each other in their desperation to flee. The mob shattered, dissolving into a chaotic mass of individuals running for their lives back toward the southern road, back toward Glemfeld. Claude Schultz was the first to abandon his sway-backed horse, sprinting on foot, screaming in terror. We watched from the wall as the camp emptied in minutes. Arkan snapped his fingers. The tear in the sky sealed. The massive jade serpent vanished instantly. The black clouds dissipated. The silence returned, broken only by the sound of crickets and the distant, fading screams of the retreating mob. Andrea collapsed, exhausted. Arkan caught her, lifting her gently into his arms. "It is done," he said, his voice weary. Broomhilda lowered her rifle. "They won't be back." I looked out at the empty, ruined camp, then down at the town of Brighton, whole and safe below us. I looked at Arkan, holding our daughter, and at Broomhilda, standing watch. We had built a home. We had defended it. The people of Brighton would return to their homes tomorrow. The crops would be harvested. The town would thrive. I unloaded my rifle, the metallic clicks loud in the quiet night. I hoisted the weapon onto my shoulder. "Let's get her to bed," I said, turning away from the wall. "Tomorrow, Arkan, you are cleaning the study." The end. Your embrace melted my frozen heart. Your care mended more than my body. Your farewell gave me a reason to return. Modern Queen Tales presents The Warmest of Snows. The heavy tires of the Mercedes G-Class chewed through the accumulating snow on the steep incline of the Sierra Nevada highway. The windshield wipers slapped back and forth, smearing thick, wet flakes across the glass. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel. My knuckles shone stark white against my pale skin. A printed stack of bank statements sat on the passenger seat. The numbers glared at me in stark black ink. $6 million. Roy Caldwell, my manager and the man I had dated for 3 years, transferred the funds over 14 months into offshore accounts under a shell corporation. I discovered the discrepancies yesterday morning between wardrobe fittings for a hollow, big-budget action movie I despised. I felt the physical weight of my burnout pressing down on my chest, a crushing pressure built from 10 years of smiling for cameras, starving myself for roles, and trusting the wrong people. Roy owned a secluded ski lodge near the summit of this mountain. I drove up here to throw those papers in his face. I wanted to watch his smug, polished expression shatter. I pushed down on the accelerator. The engine roared. The rear tires lost traction on a sudden, invisible sheet of black ice. The massive SUV swung violently to the right. I slammed my foot on the brake pedal. The vehicle entered an uncontrollable spin. The headlights illuminated a blur of dark pine trunks and falling snow. The steel guardrail rushed toward the windshield. The impact sounded like an explosion of metal and glass. The airbag deployed, striking my face with the force of a concrete wall. The G-Class vaulted over the mangled barrier and plunged down the steep embankment. The world tumbled in a chaotic sequence of crushing impacts. The roof caved inward. The windows shattered, showering me with sharp, frozen fragments. The vehicle slammed into the trunk of a massive sequoia and stopped dead. Silence rushed in, broken only by the hiss of the ruptured radiator. Searing pain radiated from my left arm and my ribs. The crushing weight of the deployed airbag pinned me against the seat. Freezing air poured through the shattered windows. My vision swam with dark spots. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth. I closed my eyes and let the darkness pull me under. The smell of wood smoke woke me. Warmth radiated against my right side. Rough, heavy wool blankets covered my body. I opened my eyes to a ceiling of thick, exposed wooden beams. Amber light flickered across the walls from a stone fireplace in the corner. I turned my head. A man sat at a heavy wooden table, peeling an apple with a small hunting knife. He possessed broad shoulders beneath a faded red flannel shirt. Thick, dark hair fell across his forehead. A coarse beard obscured his jawline. His hands moved with precise, deliberate strength. He noticed my movement and set the knife down. He stood and walked to the edge of the bed. He stood well over 6 feet tall. His eyes were a deep, solid brown. "You're awake," he said. His voice rumbled, deep and calm. "Where am I?" My throat felt like dry sandpaper. "My cabin, 3 miles down the ridge from the highway." He picked up an enamel cup from a bedside table and held it to my lips. "Drink." The water tasted metallic and fresh, straight from a well. I swallowed greedily. "My name is Malcolm Andrews," he said. "I found your truck at the bottom of the ravine yesterday evening. I pulled you out before the storm completely buried the wreck." I tried to sit up. A sharp, blinding agony sliced through my chest. I gasped and fell back against the pillows. "Don't move," Malcolm instructed. "You have 3 broken ribs. Your left forearm is fractured. I set the bone and splinted it. I wrapped your chest. You have a concussion and a deep laceration on your forehead." I looked down. 2 pieces of smooth wood flanked my left arm, bound tightly with strips of clean white linen. "You need to call an ambulance," I whispered. "I need to call the police." "I don't have a phone," Malcolm said. "I don't have electricity. The blizzard dumped 4 feet of snow on the mountain overnight. The pass is blocked. Nobody is coming up here, and we aren't going down." He walked over to a cast-iron stove and lifted a pot. The rich scent of chicken broth filled the small cabin. He poured the liquid into a wooden bowl, brought it to the bed, and sat on the edge of the mattress. He dipped a wooden spoon into the broth and offered it to me. I opened my mouth and accepted the food. The warmth spread through my chest, soothing the raw ache inside me. I watched his face. He held no recognition in his eyes. He saw a broken woman in a snowstorm. He did not see Stella Norrington, the highest-paid actress of the year. He did not see the face from the billboards on Sunset Boulevard. "Thank you," I said softly. "Rest," he replied. "Your body needs time to mend." Time slowed down to the rhythm of the rising sun and the crackling fire. The blizzard raged for 5 days, burying the cabin up to the windowsills. Malcolm maintained a steady, quiet routine. He chopped wood outside, the rhythmic thwack of his axe echoing through the frozen air. He hauled water from a covered well. He cooked simple, hearty meals over the fire. I spent the first week drifting in and out of a painkiller-induced haze. Malcolm gave me willow bark tea and herbal tinctures that dulled the sharp edges of my injuries. He changed my bandages with gentle, calloused fingers. His touch possessed a reassuring competence. As my mind cleared and the pain subsided to a dull ache, I began to observe my surroundings. The cabin consisted of 1 large room, built entirely by hand. Hand-carved chairs sat around the sturdy table. Books lined the walls, leather-bound volumes of history, philosophy, and agriculture. Jars of preserved vegetables, dried meats, and herbs filled the open pantry shelves. On the 8th day, I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and stood up. The floorboards felt cold beneath my bare feet. I took a deep breath, braced my ribs, and walked slowly to the small window. A vast expanse of untouched white snow blanketed the world. Towering pines stooped under the weight of the ice. Malcolm opened the heavy oak door and stepped inside, carrying an armful of split logs. He kicked the door shut and stomped the snow from his boots. He paused when he saw me standing. "You should be resting," he said. "I need to move," I told him. "I feel suffocated lying there." He set the logs by the fireplace and walked toward me. He stopped 2 feet away, looking down into my face. "You have color in your cheeks today," he observed. "I feel stronger." I looked at his hands. Dirt lined his knuckles. "Tell me about this place. Tell me about you." He gestured to the 2 chairs by the hearth. We sat down. The fire warmed the front of my legs. "I bought this acreage 10 years ago," Malcolm said. "I worked as a structural engineer in Chicago. I built skyscrapers. I lived in glass boxes. I spent my days in meetings discussing profit margins and steel tensile strength. I realized I hated every second of it. I hated the noise. I hated the concrete. I bought the land, drove out here, and built the cabin. I grow my own food. I hunt. I read." "You live completely alone." "Yes." I looked at the dancing flames. I lived surrounded by people, assistants, managers, publicists, makeup artists, fans. Millions of people looked at me every day. I felt completely empty. I felt like a product on a shelf. Malcolm leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "What do you do?" "I act in movies." I gave him my name, Stella Norrington. He nodded slowly. "I haven't seen a movie in a decade. I don't know who you are." A profound sense of relief washed over me. I smiled. A genuine, unguarded smile. That is the best thing anyone has ever said to me. Weeks turned into a month. The deep winter held the mountain in its icy grip. My ribs healed. Malcolm removed the splint from my arm. The bone ached, but the strength slowly returned. I integrated myself into his life. I learned to knead bread dough with my good hand. I learned to tend the fire. I swept the floor. I watched him mend his snowshoes and sharpen his tools. We talked for hours in the evenings. We discussed the books on his shelves. We talked about the migration patterns of the elk. We talked about the structural integrity of the cabin's roof. We never talked about Hollywood. We never talked about Roy Caldwell or the stolen $6 million. My burnout faded. The relentless anxiety that plagued my life in Los Angeles vanished. I slept soundly through the night. I woke up with a clear mind and a sense of purpose. I loved the smell of the pine trees. I loved the physical exertion of hauling water. I fell in love with Malcolm. I watched the muscles in his back flex beneath his shirt when he chopped wood. I watched the focused intensity in his eyes when he read by the firelight. I felt the deep, rumbling vibration of his chest when he laughed at my attempts to identify animal tracks in the snow. One evening, late in February, a fierce wind rattled the cabin windows. We sat on the rug in front of the fireplace, playing a game of chess on a hand-carved wooden board. I reached out to move my knight. My hand brushed against his. I froze. He turned his hand over and laced his fingers through mine. His skin felt rough and warm. He looked up from the board. The air in the cabin grew thick and heavy. He leaned in. I closed my eyes. His lips touched mine. The kiss started slow and cautious, an exploration of boundaries. I leaned forward, pressing my chest against his. The kiss deepened. A surge of pure, primal heat ignited in my belly. He pulled back slightly, his breathing ragged. He cupped my face in both of his large hands. "Stella," he whispered. "Don't stop," I answered. He stood up, pulling me with him. He lifted me effortlessly into his arms and carried me to the bed. The heavy wool blankets fell away. The firelight cast long shadows across our skin. We made love with a desperate, urgent intensity. His hands mapped every contour of my body. He possessed me with a fierce, protective strength. I dug my fingers into his shoulders, anchoring myself to him. I felt grounded, real, and entirely consumed by the man holding me. Spring arrived in late March. The snow began to melt, turning the mountain streams into raging torrents. The heavy drifts receded, exposing the brown earth and the first green shoots of alpine grass. "The pass is clear enough for the truck," Malcolm announced one morning over breakfast. "I need to drive down to the supply post in the valley. I need seed for the garden, salt, and kerosene." "I'll come with you," I said. He shook his head. "The road is treacherous, deep mud and washouts. You stay here. I will be back by nightfall." I agreed. I spent the day deep cleaning the cabin. I aired out the blankets, scrubbed the table, and prepared a venison roast in the Dutch oven. Malcolm returned just as the sun dipped below the ridgeline. He carried 2 heavy canvas sacks into the cabin and dropped them on the floor. His face looked grim. His jaw was clenched tight. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded newspaper. He dropped it onto the wooden table. "I bought this at the general store," he said. His voice sounded cold and tight. "You need to look at it." I walked over to the table and flattened the paper. The masthead belonged to the Los Angeles Times. The date printed at the top read March 22nd. My face occupied the entire front page. The bold black headline screamed, "Stella Norrington declared dead. Manager launches foundation to catch killer." I stared at the words. The blood drained from my face. My heart hammered against my ribs. I read the article. Roy Caldwell reported me missing 2 days after the blizzard. He told the police I received death threats from an obsessed fan. A week later, search and rescue found my wrecked SUV at the bottom of the ravine. They found blood on the steering wheel, but no body. Roy spun a massive, elaborate lie. He claimed the stalker ambushed me on the road, ran me off the cliff, and took my body. He held a televised press conference, crying on camera, begging for information. He convinced a judge to declare me legally dead due to the overwhelming evidence of foul play and the harsh elements. Then came the final, devastating blow. Roy inherited control of my estate as my primary beneficiary. He liquidated my assets. He took the $6 million he had already stolen, added the remaining $40 million from my accounts, and funneled it all into the Stella Norrington Memorial Foundation. He was actively raising millions more from my grieving fans and industry colleagues. The police arrested a 19-year-old college student from Ohio. The boy wrote me fan letters. Roy planted evidence my stolen jewelry in the boy's dorm room. Rage, pure and blinding, erupted in my chest. Roy stole my money. He stole my life. Now he was destroying an innocent kid to cover his tracks and line his pockets. I looked up at Malcolm. He stood by the fire, watching me. "He declared me dead," I said. My voice shook with fury. "He framed a kid for my murder." "What do you want to do?" Malcolm asked. "I have to go back. I have to stop him." Malcolm walked over and placed his hands on my shoulders. His grip felt solid and reassuring. "I will drive you to Los Angeles." "No," I said, stepping back. I have to do this alone. If you come with me, they will drag you into the media circus. They will ruin your peace. They will ruin this place. He looked at me, a muscle feathering in his jaw. I don't care about the peace. I care about you. I need your truck, I told him. I will come back. I promise you, Malcolm, I will come back here. But I have to end this first. He stared into my eyes for a long moment, searching for any hesitation. He found none. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the brass keys to his heavy-duty Dodge pickup. He pressed them into my palm. Bring my truck back, Stella, he said. The drive to Los Angeles took 9 hours. I left the mountains behind and descended into the smog-choked basin of the city. The noise assaulted my ears. The glaring neon lights burned my eyes. I felt like an alien returning to a hostile planet. I wore Malcolm's spare clothes, baggy jeans, a gray thermal shirt, and heavy work boots. My hair hung loose and unstyled. A pale pink scar ran across my forehead. I possessed no ID, no money, and no phone. I drove straight to the Wilshire Boulevard police precinct. I parked the mud-caked Dodge in a red zone right in front of the glass doors. I walked into the bright, sterile lobby. A bored-looking desk sergeant sat behind thick, reinforced glass. I walked up to the speaker slot. I need to speak to the lead detective on the Stella Norrington murder case, I said. The sergeant looked up, annoyed. Case is closed, miss. Suspect is awaiting trial. The suspect is innocent, I said, leaning closer to the glass. Roy Caldwell framed him. The sergeant sighed heavily. Look, lady, if you have a tip, call the hotline. I pushed my hair back from my face. I stared directly into his eyes. Look at my face. I am Stella Norrington. I am not dead. The sergeant froze. His eyes widened. The color drained from his face. He scrambled backward in his rolling chair, knocking a stack of files onto the floor. He grabbed his radio. Within 3 minutes, 4 detectives rushed into the lobby. They surrounded me, their expressions a mix of disbelief and shock. Detective Miller, a tall man with graying temples who had appeared on the news with Roy, stepped forward. Miss Norrington? He asked, his voice cracking. Roy Caldwell embezzled $6 million from my accounts, I stated clearly. I found out. I drove to his cabin to confront him. My car crashed in the blizzard. I survived. Roy used the crash to declare me dead, steal the rest of my fortune, and frame an innocent teenager. Miller swallowed hard. We need to get you into an interview room. I sat in the windowless room for 3 hours. I gave a detailed, exhaustive statement. I provided the account numbers I had memorized from the printed bank statements. I explained the timeline. I let the police medical examiner document my healed injuries. Caldwell is hosting a massive memorial gala tonight at the Beverly Hills Hotel, Detective Miller told me. He's soliciting donations for the foundation. The mayor is there. Half of Hollywood is there. I want to go, I said. Miller smiled, a hard, predatory grimace. We were hoping you would say that. The Beverly Hills Hotel ballroom dripped with crystal chandeliers and white lilies. Hundreds of people wore somber black formal wear. Photographers clustered around the perimeter, snapping pictures of weeping actresses and stoic producers. Roy Caldwell stood at the center of the stage. He wore a custom-tailored black tuxedo. He held a microphone. A massive projector screen behind him displayed a montage of my movie roles. Set to mournful classical music, I stood in the shadows of the service hallway, flanked by Detective Miller and 4 uniformed officers. Stella was a light taken from us too soon, Roy said into the microphone. His voice broke perfectly. He wiped a solitary, manufactured tear from his cheek. The violence of her end breaks my heart every day. But through this foundation, we will ensure her legacy lives on. We will find justice, and we will support the causes she loved. The crowd erupted into sympathetic applause. Now, Miller whispered. I pushed through the heavy velvet curtains and stepped out into the blinding glare of the spotlights. I walked slowly down the center aisle. I still wore Malcolm's oversized clothes and heavy boots. I looked wild, bruised, and intensely alive. The applause died. A heavy, suffocating silence slammed into the ballroom. Heads turned, eyes bulged. Someone in the front row dropped a champagne flute. The crystal shattered loudly against the marble floor. I kept my eyes locked on Roy. He stood frozen at the podium. His mouth hung open in a silent, slack-jawed scream. The microphone slipped from his fingers and hit the stage with an ear-splitting squeal of feedback. His perfect tan turned the color of old ash. I walked up the short flight of stairs onto the stage. I stopped, 3 feet from him. "Hello, Roy," I said. My voice echoed across the silent room without a microphone. "Stella," he choked out. He took a step backward. He looked like a man staring at a ghost. You're dead!" "No," I replied, stepping closer. "I survived. I survived the crash, and I survived you." The flashbulbs erupted. A blinding storm of white light illuminated the stage. The press corps broke out of their shock and began screaming questions. Detective Miller walked onto the stage, followed by the uniformed officers. Miller pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "Roy Caldwell," Miller announced, his voice carrying over the chaos. "You are under arrest for grand theft, fraud, filing a false police report, and obstruction of justice." An officer grabbed Roy's arms and wrenched them behind his back. The metal cuffs clicked shut with a sharp, final sound. Roy locked eyes with me as they dragged him away from the podium. His face twisted into a mask of pure terror and defeat. He lost everything in a matter of seconds. I watched them march him down the aisle and out the double doors. A reporter from CNN pushed her way to the edge of the stage, shoving a microphone toward my feet. "Stella, Miss Norrington, where have you been? What happened?" I walked over and picked up the microphone Roy had dropped. I tapped it once. The sound boomed through the speakers. "Roy Caldwell is a thief and a liar," I announced to the room and the rolling cameras. "He stole my money, and he tried to steal my life. The young man currently in jail is innocent. I expect the district attorney to release him immediately." I looked out over the crowd of shocked faces. I saw directors I worked with, publicists who manipulated me, actors who smiled to my face and stabbed me in the back. I felt nothing for any of them. The glittering illusion of Hollywood lay dead at my feet. "Effective immediately, I am retiring from acting," I declared. "My estate will refund every dollar donated to that fraudulent foundation. I am liquidating my remaining assets. You will never see me on a screen again." I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a dull thud. I turned around, walked down the stairs, and exited through the service doors. The lawyers handled the mess over the next 3 days. The district attorney released the college student and dropped all charges. The judge froze Roy's accounts and seized the embezzled funds. Roy remained in county jail without bail, facing 20 years in federal prison. I sold my mansion in Bel Air to a tech billionaire. I fired my entire team. I bought the thousands of acres of mountain ridge surrounding Malcolm's property, ensuring no developer or logging company could ever touch the land. On the 4th morning, I climbed back into the heavy Dodge pickup. I filled the bed with supplies, new tools, heavy winter coats, flour, sugar, and coffee. I drove out of the city. I watched the smog give way to clear blue skies. The flat highway turned into winding mountain roads. The temperature dropped. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. My heart beat with a steady, joyous rhythm. I navigated the dirt road leading to the ridge. The trees parted, the cabin sat in the clearing, sturdy and permanent against the backdrop of the towering peaks. Smoke curled from the stone chimney. Malcolm stood on the porch. He wore his red flannel shirt. His hands rested on his hips. He watched the truck pull into the yard and come to a stop. I killed the engine, opened the door, and stepped out onto the dirt. I walked toward the porch. Malcolm walked down the wooden steps to meet me. He looked at my face, tracing the lines of my expression. "You did it," he said. "He's in jail. The kid is free. I'm done with all of it," I told him. "I bought the mountain." Malcolm smiled. The expression transformed his rough face, filling his dark eyes with immense warmth. He reached out and pulled me against his chest. I wrapped my arms around his waist and buried my face in his shoulder. He smelled of wood smoke and clean air. "Welcome home, Stella," he murmured against my hair. I squeezed him tighter. I closed my eyes. I was exactly where I belonged. The end. Not this time. Not this life. Tonight, I'm the judge, the jury, and the executioner. Modern Queen Tales presents A Trial to Remember. The silence in the apartment was the heavy, suffocating silence of a drawn breath, the kind that exists in the fraction of a second before a bomb detonates. I stood in the center of the bedroom, the hardwood floor biting into the bare soles of my feet. My chest heaved, pulling in shallow, ragged breaths of air that tasted faintly of copper and stale whiskey. The copper was from my own split lip. The whiskey was Daniel's. Through the thin wall separating the bedroom from the living room, I could hear the steady, rhythmic sound of his snoring. To anyone else, it might have sounded like the deep sleep of an exhausted man. To me, it was the sound of a predator digesting its kill. My hands, trembling so violently they barely felt like my own, moved in the dark. I didn't dare turn on a lamp. The yellow glare would spill under the crack of the door, and if the light woke him, if he saw me packing, the night would end with my body in a plastic bag. He had told me as much, his voice, a low, reasonable whisper, as his hands had clamped around my throat 2 hours earlier. "You make me do this, Joan. You know how much I love you. Why do you make me hurt you?" I shoved a handful of underwear, a thick sweater, and my passport into the canvas duffel bag on the bed. I was operating on the pure, crystalline adrenaline of a cornered animal that has finally realized the cage is meant for slaughter, not shelter. For 3 years, I had believed the cage was love. Daniel was a respected police sergeant, decorated, admired by the community, the kind of man people called a hero. When he first looked at me, I felt chosen. When he first started isolating me from my friends, I thought it was devotion. When the possessiveness turned to anger, I thought it was stress from the job. When the anger turned to physical violence, he convinced me it was my fault. I had tried to leave once before, a year ago. I made it as far as a domestic violence shelter 3 towns over. The intake worker had been kind, offering me tea and a cot. But 2 hours later, a police cruiser rolled up to the front door. It was Daniel's partner, grinning tightly at the staff, saying there had been a misunderstanding. Daniel was waiting in the passenger seat. Because he was a cop, he knew the addresses of all the safe houses. Because he was a cop, the system didn't protect me from him. The system was him. But tonight was different. Tonight, as the edges of my vision had darkened while his thumbs pressed into my windpipe, I felt a sudden, blinding snap of clarity. A profound, echoing, enough. I zipped the duffel bag. The metallic rasp sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. In the living room, the snoring hitched. A heavy groan vibrated through the floorboards. I stopped breathing. I closed my eyes and prayed to a God I hadn't spoken to in years. Please, just let him sleep. Please. A few agonizing seconds passed. The snoring resumed, deep and steady. My boots were in the living room, right next to the couch where he sprawled, his service weapon resting on the coffee table within an arm's reach. I couldn't go in there. I grabbed the duffel bag, bypassed the living room entirely by taking the secondary door through the ensuite bathroom that led to the hall, and slipped out of the apartment. The click of the deadbolt sliding into place behind me was the loudest sound I had ever heard. I ran. The concrete of the fire stairs was freezing against my bare feet, but I barely felt it. I practically threw myself down 3 flights of stairs, terrified that at any moment the heavy fire door above me would burst open and his massive frame would fill the stairwell. I pushed through the heavy glass doors and spilled out into the unforgiving chill of the city night. It was raining. A fine, icy mist that immediately clung to my hair and seeped through the thin fabric of my blouse. The streetlights overhead cast long, sickly yellow shadows on the wet pavement. I kept to the alleys, sticking to the darkest parts of the street. Every passing car made me flinch. Every flash of headlights could be a patrol car. To the city, Daniel was a protector. If a cruiser saw a bruised, barefoot woman running through the rain with a duffel bag, they would stop her. They would run her name, and within 5 minutes, Daniel's radio would crackle with the news that his unstable girlfriend had been located. I walked for what felt like hours. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving behind a cold, hollow exhaustion. My feet were bleeding, the tender skin scraped raw by asphalt and broken glass. I was shivering uncontrollably, my teeth chattering so hard my jaw ached. I had nowhere to go. My parents were dead. The few friends I used to have had been systematically alienated by Daniel's charm and subsequent toxicity. Reaching out to them now would only put targets on their backs. I had no car, barely any cash, and a phone I had left sitting on the bathroom counter because I knew Daniel could track its GPS. I was a ghost, haunting my own life. As I rounded a corner onto a wider, commercial avenue, a splash of crimson light bled across the wet pavement. I looked up, blinking against the rain. It was a museum, a grand, Gothic, revival building of dark stone and towering arches. Hung between 2 of the massive marble pillars was a brightly lit, blood-red banner. The Spanish Inquisition, Shadows of Power, Special Late-Night Exhibition. I stared at the banner, the words swimming in my exhausted vision. Witch trials, false accusations, instruments of torture, powerful men deciding the fates of women who dared to exist outside their control. The irony was so sharp it tasted like ash in my mouth. It was too familiar. The aesthetic had changed over the centuries, the overt religious zealotry replaced by the sterile authority of a police badge, but the machinery was the exact same. I moved toward the building, drawn by the memory of the man who ran the place, Tristan. 3 years ago, before the isolation was complete, Daniel had taken me to a gallery opening here. It was a rare night out. I had been wearing a dress Daniel had picked out too tight, too restrictive, and I had spoken to another man for too long. Daniel had gripped my wrist, his fingers digging into the fragile bones with a silent, agonizing pressure, smiling warmly at the crowd while he hurt me. No one saw. No one ever saw. Except the curator, Tristan. He was a tall man with kind, observant eyes and an easy demeanor that masked a sharp intellect. He had walked over, smoothly inserted himself into the conversation, and somehow, without making a scene, forced Daniel to release my arm. When Daniel had turned away to grab a drink, Tristan had handed me his business card. He just looked at me, truly saw me, and whispered, "If you ever need a door to walk through, mine is open." Daniel had found the card later that night and shredded it, raging about pretentious museum nerds. But I had memorized the name, Tristan Connors. Desperation is a powerful compass. I stumbled up the wide marble steps, leaving faint, bloody footprints on the pristine stone. The main entrance was dark, the heavy oak doors locked tight. I panicked, dragging my hands down the cold glass of the side panels. "No, no, please," I murmured, my voice cracking. I moved around to the side of the building, where a smaller service entrance stood next to a glowing security keypad. Through the frosted glass of the door, I saw a light on down the hallway. I pounded my fists against the glass. "Please help me!" The sound of my own voice terrified me. It was too loud. I was exposed. I looked back over my shoulder at the street, half expecting to see Daniel's cruiser rounding the corner. A shadow shifted behind the frosted glass. The heavy locks tumbled with a thick, metallic clack, and the door swung open. Tristan stood there. He looked older than I remembered, his dark hair slightly messy, wearing a soft wool sweater and holding a stack of archival folders. He blinked at me, his eyes widening as he took in the sight, soaking wet, barefoot, shivering, with a fresh, purple bruise blooming across my jaw. "Joan?" he breathed, recognizing me instantly. I couldn't speak. A sob tore its way out of my throat, an ugly, animal sound. I swayed, the last of my strength evaporating. Tristan dropped the folders. They scattered across the polished floor. He reached out and pulled me inside, his hands gentle, telegraphing every movement so he wouldn't frighten me. He slammed the heavy steel door shut and threw the deadbolt. "I'm sorry," I gasped, my teeth chattering. "I didn't know where else I couldn't." Shh, Tristan said softly. He shrugged off his thick, warm wool coat and wrapped it tightly around my trembling shoulders. The scent of its cedar and old paper was so sharply comforting it brought fresh tears to my eyes. He guided me to a small bench in the hallway, crouching down in front of me so he was lower than my eye level. He looked at my bruised face, his eyes dark with a quiet, terrible understanding, and said the words I hadn't heard in years. "You're safe here, Joan." I closed my eyes, pulling the coat tighter around myself, burying my face in the collar. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I let myself believe it. I was hidden behind stone walls and steel doors. I was with someone who saw the truth. I was safe. I believed him. For exactly 10 minutes. Tristan had just returned from a back office with a cup of hot tea and a first aid kit when the sound echoed through the cavernous museum. Boom, boom, boom. The pounding on the main front doors was relentless, shaking the heavy oak frames. It was the rhythmic, demanding violence of a man who believed he owned whatever was on the other side. "Joan!" His voice carried through the thick wood, echoing down the marble halls. Furious, possessive, certain. "Joan, open the door! I know you're in there! The street cameras caught you! Open the goddamn door, baby, or I'm going to break it down!" The teacup slipped from my numb fingers, shattering on the tile floor. Hot liquid splashed against my ankles, but I didn't feel it. The temporary warmth Tristan had provided vanished, replaced by an arctic terror that froze the blood in my veins. He found me. Of course he found me. I had forgotten the cardinal rule of my existence. Daniel always wins. He had access to the city's grid, the traffic cams, the patrols. I was a rat in a maze he owned. Tristan stood up slowly, his expression hardening. He stepped over the broken porcelain, his eyes fixed on the hallway leading to the front doors. "Stay here," he said, his voice dropping to a low, authoritative register. "I'm going to call the precinct captain directly. I know him. Daniel isn't getting in here. No! I lunged forward, grabbing Tristan's arm. The fabric of his sweater bunched in my panicked grip. You can't! He'll say I'm crazy! He'll say I broke in! He's armed, Tristan. If you stand between him and me, he will kill you and frame you for it. He's done it. He's threatened it before. You don't know what he is. Crash. The sound of shattering glass tore through the air. The heavy security pane of the side door, the one I had just come through, splintered inward. Daniel had given up on the main entrance and found my entry point. Joan, Daniel roared, his voice now inside the building. Don't make this worse than it has to be. Go. I shoved Tristan toward the back offices. Hide, please. If he doesn't see you, maybe he won't hurt you. I'm not leaving you, Tristan hissed, reaching for a heavy bronze stanchion from a nearby display. I'm not asking you, I cried softly, backing away from him. I led him here. I have to lead him away. Before Tristan could grab me, I turned and sprinted blindly into the dark heart of the museum. I didn't know the layout. I just followed the deepest shadows, my bare feet silent on the polished stone floors. I pushed through a set of heavy velvet curtains and found myself plunged into a suffocating, dimly lit cavern. I had run straight into the Inquisition exhibition. The air in here felt different. It was heavy, artificially chilled, smelling of old dust, untreated wood, and rusted iron. The lighting was dramatic, casting long, grotesque shadows across the walls. I darted behind a massive wooden structure, a rack, complete with thick ropes and turning wheels. My lungs burned as I tried to muffle my breathing. Footsteps echoed in the hall outside the exhibit. Slow, heavy, deliberate. The unmistakable sound of Daniel's boots. Joan. His voice was a sing-song taunt, dripping with false sympathy. Look what you're doing, baby. Running around barefoot in the dark. You're sick. You're not thinking straight. Come out here so I can take you home and take care of you. I pressed my back against a stone pillar, trembling so hard the bones in my spine ached against the rock. I looked around the room, desperate for a better hiding spot. The displays were disturbingly real. Arranged in bleak dioramas were life-sized mannequins, sculpted with agonizing precision. Women bound to wooden chairs, women stretched over tables. Their faces were painted with haunting realism, eyes wide with terror, mouths twisted in silent, eternal screams. They were frozen mid-interrogation, trapped under the painted, sneering gazes of robed inquisitors. I know you're in this room, Joan. Daniel's voice drifted closer. The creak of the floorboards meant he had crossed the threshold. I can smell the rain on you. Panic, absolute and blinding, consumed me. I couldn't breathe. The walls were closing in. I slunk deeper into the exhibit, moving behind a diorama of a woman chained to a damp dungeon wall. The mannequin was so lifelike, her sculpted ribs showing through torn canvas, her head hanging in defeat. I crouched beside her, curling myself into a tight ball, making myself as small as possible. Don't see me. Don't see me. Found you, a voice whispered. But it wasn't Daniel's voice. I gasped and whipped my head around. The sound hadn't come from the doorway. It had come from right beside me. Before I could process what was happening, a hand clamped over my mouth. It was freezing cold, hard, and smooth. I looked up. The mannequin chained to the wall was looking down at me. Its painted eyes were alive, filled with a sorrow so deep it felt like an ocean crashing over my head. The plastic fingers gripping my face felt like ancient, petrified bone. A scream died in my throat. The room around me, the shadows, the racks, the approaching sound of Daniel's boots began to warp and spin. The ground fell out from under me. The world went violently, completely dark. I slammed onto my knees. The impact sent a shockwave of pain up my shins. Instead of the smooth marble of the museum floor beneath me, it was jagged, damp cobblestone. I gasped, pulling air into my lungs. The sterile museum chill was gone, replaced by heat-stifling, oppressive heat, thick with the stench of burning beeswax, unwashed bodies, and ozone. I tried to raise my hands to my face, but they were heavy. A sharp clinking sound echoed around me. I looked down. My wrists were encased in thick, rusted iron manacles. A heavy chain connected them, scraping against the stone. My clothes were gone. I was wearing a heavy, intricately embroidered silk gown, though the rich emerald fabric was torn, stained with mud and dried blood. What is this? I tried to speak, but my throat was raw, as if I had been screaming for days. She refuses to confess, Your Grace. The voice boomed above me. I flinched and looked up. I was kneeling in the center of a cavernous, arched room lit by roaring torches. Tapestries bearing the crest of the Spanish crown and the Holy Office hung from the stone walls. In front of me, seated behind a massive, elevated wooden desk, was a tribunal of men in dark robes. My eyes locked onto the man in the center, the Chief Inquisitor. He was dressed in the opulent robes of a high-ranking official, a heavy silver cross resting against his chest. But the face was a nightmare dragged into the light. It was Daniel. His hair was longer, slicked back, and his skin bore the rough texture of a life lived by different standards of hygiene. But the eyes were identical, cold, flat, and shining with a sadistic, entitled hunger. The same smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth, the exact expression he wore right before he hit me. Miranda de la Riva, the Inquisitor with Daniel's face intoned, his voice echoing off the stone. Miranda. The name slammed into my consciousness. The memories flooded my mind, vast and terrifying. I was Miranda, a wealthy widow in Seville, independent, educated. I had refused the advances of a powerful magistrate, and in retaliation, I had been stripped of my lands, my wealth, and my freedom, accused of communing with the devil. You stand accused of heresy, of unnatural independence, and of corrupting the natural order ordained by God, the Inquisitor continued, his eyes tracing the torn neckline of my dress with familiar, sickening possession. Confess your sins, woman. Submit to the mercy of the court, and your soul may yet be saved. Defy me, and you will burn. The terror I felt as Joan merged perfectly with the terror of Miranda. It was the same trap. Different century, different clothes, same predator. But Miranda had something Joan had forgotten. She had rage. I confess to nothing, I heard myself say. My voice, Miranda's voice, was hoarse but steady, because I have done nothing. The only corruption in this room sits upon that chair. The Inquisitor's smirk vanished, replaced by the explosive, violent rage I knew so intimately. He slammed his fist onto the wooden desk. Blasphemy! You dare! She speaks the truth. The shout came from the side of the room. A guard, dressed in the leather and chainmail of the city watch, stepped forward out of the shadows. He threw his halberd to the ground. I turned my head. It was Raoul. But beneath the grime, the sweat, and the period clothing, the soul looking out of those fierce, defiant eyes was unmistakable. Tristan, you frame her because she would not yield to you, Raoul yelled, pointing a gauntleted finger at the Inquisitor. This court is a farce. It is the vanity of a bruised man parading as divine justice. Treason, the Inquisitor roared, standing up. Seize him. 4 guards descended on Raoul. He fought like a demon, his fists connecting with bone and armor, desperately trying to carve a path to me. He managed to knock 2 of them down, his eyes locked on mine, a gaze of such profound, self-sacrificing love that it physically hurt my chest. But there were too many. A guard brought the heavy wooden hilt of a sword down on the back of Raoul's head. He crumpled to the stone floor, blood pooling beneath him. "No!" I screamed, lunging forward, but the chains dragged me back down. The Inquisitor laughed. It was Daniel's laugh. A sound of pure, unadulterated victory. "Take them both to the plaza. The fire will purify their arrogance." The transition was a blur of violence and heat. The memory fast-forwarded through the damp darkness of a dungeon cell, where Raoul and I had pressed our bloodied hands together through the iron bars separating us. Where he had whispered that he would find me in every life until we were free. Where we had made a desperate, doomed attempt to overwhelm a guard, only to be dragged, beaten, and broken into the blinding sunlight of a public square. The smell of smoke was already heavy in the air. I was strapped to a rough-hewn wooden stake, the ropes cut deeply into my forearms. The crowd around us was a sea of blur and noise, shouting curses, throwing rotten food, but I didn't see them. I only saw Raoul. He was bound to the stake next to mine. His face was unrecognizable from the beatings, but his eyes were clear, bright, and fixed solely on me. The Inquisitor stood on a balcony overlooking the plaza, holding a burning torch. He looked down at me, expecting me to beg, expecting me to break, just like Daniel in the apartment. But as the executioner took the torch and lowered it to the dry brush piled at my feet, I didn't look at the Inquisitor. I didn't give him my fear. I looked at Raoul. "I love you," I mouthed, over the roar of the crowd. "Forever," he mouthed back, straining against his ropes. The flames caught. The heat was instantaneous and absolute, a roaring monster devouring the air. The pain was beyond comprehension, a white-hot agony that consumed flesh and bone. But even as the smoke filled my lungs, even as the world burned away, I kept my eyes locked on his. We died not as victims, but as an act of defiance. We chose each other, and in the heart of the fire, as everything turned to ash, I remembered, gasp, air tore into my lungs, cold and sterile. My eyes flew open. I was on the floor of the museum. The smell of smoke and roasting flesh vanished, replaced by the scent of floor wax and dust. The heavy silk and iron chains were gone, replaced by my wet sweater and the familiar ache in my bare feet. The mannequin chained to the wall above me was perfectly still, its plastic hand resting at its side. But I was not the same. I lay there for a second, my chest heaving, the residual heat of a 16th century pyre radiating from my bones. The memories settled into my marrow, heavy and permanent. Miranda, Joan, Raoul, Tristan, the Inquisitor, Daniel. The realization hit me with the force of a tectonic shift. This was a cycle of souls. Daniel was a parasite, a spirit of pure, entitled malice that moved through time, finding women, breaking them, consuming their light. He had done this to me in Seville. He was doing it to me in this city. He had likely done it a dozen times in between. He always played the judge, the cop, the authority. He always rigged the game. And I always ran. I always died. Until now. I slowly pushed myself up off the floor. My knees popped in the quiet exhibit. The hollow, terrified space inside my chest had been filled with something ancient, heavy, and incandescent. Power, truth, memory. I looked around the dark exhibition hall, the mannequins. Through the veil of my newly awakened sight, I saw the truth. They were monuments. They were vessels for the echoes of the women Daniel and men like him had broken. They were the witnesses of history, trapped in silent screams, waiting in the dark, waiting for someone who remembered, waiting for someone to lead them. Joan. The voice came from the entrance of the exhibit. I turned. Daniel stood in the archway, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the dim emergency lights of the hallway. In his right hand, his heavy black service weapon was drawn and pointed at the floor. In his left hand, he held Tristan by the collar of his sweater. Tristan was unconscious, a brutal gash bleeding sluggishly over his temple. Daniel let go. Tristan slumped to the floor like a discarded rag doll. "Look what you made me do, Joan." Daniel sighed, his voice dripping with that familiar, paternalistic disappointment. He stepped into the exhibit, kicking Tristan's legs out of his way. He raised the gun, pointing it squarely at my chest. "You drag me out in the rain. You make me hurt this poor bastard. You're a mess, baby. You're sick." He walked slowly toward me, stepping past the displays of torture. He looked perfectly at home among the instruments of suffering. "I'm going to take you back," he said, his voice dropping into a soothing, dangerous purr. "We're going to go home. You're going to apologize. And we'll see if I can forgive you. If you make me chase you through these stupid dolls anymore, I'm going to put a bullet in your kneecap and drag you to the car. Understand?" He expected the routine. He expected the tears. He expected the frantic, stammering apologies, the trembling hands, the desperate submission to avoid the pain. He expected Joan. He was wrong. I straightened my spine. I lifted my chin, the bruise on my jaw catching the dim light. I looked into the eyes of the man who had murdered me in a past life, the man who had tortured me in this one, and I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical disgust. "You don't get to judge me anymore," I said. My voice was a command. It echoed off the stone walls, layering with the phantom acoustics of a Spanish tribunal. Daniel stopped walking. A flicker of genuine confusion crossed his face. The script was broken. "What the hell are you talking about? Get on your knees, Joan." I looked at him, and I lifted my right hand. Not this time. The air in the museum snapped. The temperature plummeted so fast my breath plumed into thick white fog. The emergency lights overhead flickered, whined, and died, plunging the room into near total darkness, illuminated only by the faint, unearthly glow of the streetlights filtering through high windows. Crack! The sound was sharp, like a bone breaking. It came from the diorama to my left. Daniel whipped his gun toward the sound. "Who's there? Police! Show yourself!" Crack! Screech! Another sound, to his right, the agonizing screech of rusted metal and stiff joints being forced to move. Daniel spun in a circle, his breathing suddenly shallow. "Joan, what did you do? Who else is in here?" "They are," I said quietly, my hand still raised. In the dim light, the exhibition came alive. The mannequin on the rack slowly sat up, the ropes snapping around her wrists like dry twigs. The fiberglass cracked and shifted as she swung her legs over the side of the wooden torture device. The woman in the Iron Maiden stepped forward, her painted face twisting from a silent scream into a snarl of unfathomable rage. The woman chained to the wall behind me ripped the iron bolts from the faux stone plaster with a sickening tear, stepping down from her pedestal. They were all moving. Dozens of them. Women in Victorian rags, women in medieval gowns, women in plain shifts. They stepped down from their platforms, their movements jerky, unnatural, echoing with the sound of grinding plastic and splintering wood. They closed in, forming a tight, inescapable circle around Daniel. Slow, inevitable, just like he used to be. "What the fuck? What the fuck is this?" Daniel screamed, his cop persona shattering entirely. He aimed his gun at the nearest figure, a mannequin in a tattered Renaissance dress. He pulled the trigger. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet struck the mannequin square in the chest, blowing a hole through the fiberglass. She just kept walking forward, her painted eyes locked on him. "Stay back!" Daniel shrieked, backing away, but there was nowhere to go. The circle tightened. The women were a wall of silent, unstoppable vengeance. He fired again, and again. The flashes of the muzzle illuminated his face, no longer the arrogant inquisitor, no longer the untouchable cop. He was just a terrified, pathetic man who had finally realized the monsters he created had come to collect his debt. Click, click, click. His magazine was empty. He threw the gun at them. It bounced harmlessly off the shoulder of a figure. They reached him. Cold, hard, plastic hands grabbed his arms, his shoulders, his throat. "Joan, help me! Please!" Daniel screamed, thrashing wildly. The man who had choked me for a burnt dinner was now weeping, begging for mercy from the woman he had intended to kill. "You are judged," I whispered. The mannequins forced him backward. They pushed him up onto an empty wooden platform in the center of the room. He kicked, he gouged, he bit, but they were impervious. They held him down. And then the curse took hold. It started at his feet. His leather boots turned rigid, merging with the flesh of his ankles. The color drained from his jeans, turning them into a dull, painted gray plaster. Daniel looked down, his eyes bulging in pure horror as the petrification raced up his legs. "No! No! Oh God! Please!" The creeping stiffness hit his chest. His lungs seized, his frantic screams cut off abruptly, turning into a hollow, breathless wheeze. His skin hardened, taking on the smooth, lifeless sheen of polyurethane. The women stepped back, returning to the shadows, their work done. The transformation reached Daniel's neck. He looked at me one last time. In his eyes, I saw it all. The understanding, the absolute, inescapable knowledge of what he was, what he had done, and the eternal prison he had just been locked inside. Then the stiffness took his face, his mouth locked open in a rictus of terror, his eyes glazed over, turning to painted glass. Silence fell over the exhibition. I lowered my hand. The terrible, vibrating energy in the air dissipated, leaving behind nothing but the quiet hum of the museum's climate control. It was over. I exhaled a long, shuddering breath. I felt empty. The clean, bright emptiness of a canvas that had finally been wiped clean of a dark stain. I turned my back on the statue of Daniel and walked toward the entrance of the exhibit. Tristan was groaning on the floor, shifting onto his side. I knelt beside him, my movements calm and steady. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Tristan," I said softly. His eyes fluttered open. He winced, bringing a hand to the bleeding gash on his head. His focus swam for a second before landing on my face. Instantly, panic surged in his eyes. "Joan!" He tried to sit up, his instincts firing. "Daniel, where is he? He had a gun. We have to." "Shh," I said, pressing gently on his chest to keep him down. "It's okay. You're safe." I smiled. The words felt completely different coming from me. I was stating a fact. This time, I was the one in control. I helped him sit up. He leaned heavily against me, his breathing ragged. He looked around the dark hallway, his confusion mounting. "What happened? I heard gunshots. Where did he go?" "He's still here," I said, standing up and offering him my hand. Tristan took it, pulling himself to his feet. He swayed slightly, but I caught him, wrapping my arm around his waist to steady him. The physical contact sent a warm, familiar shock through my system. The echo of Raoul, standing beside me. What do you mean he's still here? Tristan whispered, his body tense. I'll show you. Together, we walked back into the exhibition room. The emergency lights had flickered back on, casting a dim, functional glow over the displays. The mannequins were back in their original positions, frozen in their tragic poses, but the air was lighter. I led Tristan to the center of the room. He stopped dead in his tracks. A sharp intake of breath hissed through his teeth. Standing on the wooden platform was a new addition to the collection. It was a perfectly rendered mannequin of a modern police officer. His uniform was flawless, down to the badge on his chest. His arms were slightly raised, his hands clawed in desperation. His face was a masterpiece of horror, eyes wide, mouth stretched open in an eternal scream of terror. "My God," Tristan whispered, stepping closer, utterly mesmerized. He reached out a hand, hovering inches from the statue's painted cheek. This wasn't in the manifest. Where did this come from? It looks exactly like," he trailed off, looking at me, his eyes wide with a question his rational mind couldn't form. "A predator turned artifact," I said simply, my voice even. "A warning." Tristan looked from the statue, to me, and back to the statue. He was a smart man. He felt the residual energy in the room. He saw the bullet casings on the floor. He saw the absolute lack of fear in my eyes. He didn't understand the mechanics of it, but he understood the reality. He slowly lowered his hand. He just looked at me, a profound, awed respect settling over his features. Is he going to be a problem?" Tristan asked, his voice steady. I stepped up to the platform. I looked into the painted glass eyes of the statue. Deep within them, far beneath the surface, I could almost swear I saw a microscopic flicker of trapped panic. "No," I said, turning away. "He's exactly where he belongs." I walked back to Tristan. The centuries of running, of burning, of breaking were over. The debt was paid. Tristan held out his hand. Not to pull me along, not to shield me, but simply to walk beside me. I took it. We walked out of the dark exhibition, through the marble halls of the museum, and toward the shattered glass of the side door. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky was turning a bruised, beautiful purple as the dawn began to break over the city. I was barefoot. I was battered. But as the cold morning air hit my face, I took a deep breath, filling my lungs completely for the first time in 3 years. I was done. I was free. And finally, across lifetimes of waiting, I was ready for something real.
If you enjoyed this quick escape, hit the subscribe button for new stories twice a week. Until then, I'll see you at the next flip of the pages.